A New Heaven. A ketamine and 1-PLSD trip report by Modern Jesus. Posted to EARBUDS.org, September 30th, 2016. Some background. I've done practically every substance you can imagine, ranging from small to heavy doses throughout my life, from many different types of psychedelics, stimulants, and sedatives. I'm a veteran. I should also note that I am what is commonly considered to be clairvoyant, with background in occult practices. Before I started my workday, I'd taken a quarter tab of 1-PLSD, 25 micrograms, as I typically do almost every other day for energy, focus, mood, etc. There was nothing out of the ordinary about my day, and I was having an awesome day in fact, and was in a great mood. At T+8 hours, I got home from work and felt an unusual urge to dive into a K-hole, so I followed my gut and proceeded to prepare my shots. I started this experience the same way I always do. I went into my temple, meditation room, and I placed the syringes before Ganesh's shrine to be blessed. I asked for my guides to keep me safe during this journey, and asked for myself to be placed in a positive timeline. I bow, thank the gods, and then proceeded to go to my bedroom and set up my speakers, blindfold, rubbing alcohol, etc. Now I'm all set. Before I lie down, I try something different this time. I speak to the universe. It is my intention to be attuned and reconnected back to my memory bank in the Akashic records through my being, and I ask to be flooded with the highest amount of information I can handle at this time. During this process, it is my will to connect with my higher self, and I ask him to orchestrate this for me. May the energy flow for as long as it's needed. Thank you. This intent was the only thing I had done differently this time around. T+9 hours. I lie down, put on my usual ketamine playlist, Merlin's Magic, Healing Harmonies, you can find it on YouTube. I vaporize a bowl and bless it with my intentions. I found through repeated experiences and experiments that getting stoned beforehand intensifies the whole. I then proceed to inject 150 mg of ketamine IM into my thigh, followed by 70 mg intranasal. I put my blindfold on, get comfortable, and prepare to blast out. As the effects start to come on, with the typical gradual dissociation and detachment, frequency increases, as well as a high-pitched ringing, and a feeling that warm and fuzzy dissociative blanket covering me. Everything began to get much more serious and intense, and I knew quite quickly that this experience was going to be much, much different than anything else I've ever gone through before. Normally, when I enter the K-hole, the typical experience consists of something that is comparable to an immersive VR cyberpunk lucid dream, where I fly around through familiar subconscious matrix memories, and end up forgetting the vast majority of what I experience, due to the memory creating part of the brain being switched off. Extreme time dilation is something typical, and normally I come out of the experience dazed for a few hours. I can usually expect a good memory defrag, and I always use the experience to tweak internal programs and beliefs while I'm in the astral. However, during this experience, I was propelled into the highest levels of supposed memory that I've never gone into before, and it was much more colourful, vivid and realistic than any of my typical experiences. Time was extremely dilated, much more so than normal, and the entire experience felt like it could have lasted several days. However, as usual, I only remember fragments I was able to hold on to. Time meant nothing. I flew through infinite layers of new and vivid landscapes, and I even remember seeing different versions of myself existing in different timelines, and choosing the timeline I was going to stick with. I remember vividly being in and seeing a type of psychedelic soul processing facility. For a period of time, I was convinced that I had accidentally killed myself, and that I was never coming back. Although, I made peace with this. I felt as if I had opened up or attuned to some type of portal system. I was presented with the choice to live or die, and I remember making the conscious choice to keep on living. So what happened next is even more hazy. I vividly remember being engulfed in a type of blue energy field, and being surrounded by many beings. I remember seeing many blue orbs, and I distinctly remember accepting a request and merging my being with another entity. I also remember different unique melodies playing during my playlist that I know that I've never heard before. The memory of the rest of my experience is foggy, but it consisted of flying through many novel and immersive landscapes. until I reached a point of being back in my body about an hour and a half later. T plus 10 hours and 30 minutes. I came out of this experience feeling absolutely ecstatic, filled with new and empowered energy. I'm now able to see many new possible timelines that I wasn't able to see before. However, I felt different. I felt amazing. But I also felt like I wasn't alone with myself. I stretched and had a shower while listening to music. I felt the urge to ask, who else is residing in my body? What immediately came out of my mouth with a strong tone was Ishtar. I then proceeded to laugh hysterically and have a conversation with this being. The details of this conversation I cannot remember, unfortunately. The rest of the experience is negligible, but I'm left with new perspective, reassurance, and a new lust for life. Speculation. Intuitively, I feel that it's possible that the heavens, the astral, have transformed, and there is a distinct newness to the territory. This may be the long prophesied time of the new heaven and new earth, now being manifest. I also feel that it's possible that I have experienced what is commonly referred to as a walk-in experience with another entity or spirit, with this being that called itself Ishtar. Since this experience, I feel as though I've acquired a type of expansion pack to my being. Perhaps I made a soul contract with another being, although I can only speculate. I feel it's likely that when a person opens themselves up to the astral realms, that they open themselves up to the possibility of unexpectedly encountering trans-dimensional beings, who may or may not have their best intentions at heart. I strongly advise asking for spiritual protection and having intentional direction during an experience like this. Now, I've gone through 100+ K-hole experiences in my life, with and without other psychedelics in my system, so I know what to expect normally. I've even gone into the K-hole while being on much higher doses of acid and even 2CB before, but never in my life have I ever experienced anything like this. I'm very familiar with the typical terrain of the astral, but this was very different. This experience report pales in comparison to the actual experience itself, and is an overall poor rendition of the scope and magnificence of what was experienced. But alas, this is the best of what I was able to remember and structure into words. With ketamine in higher doses, it's practically impossible to bring anything back, so to speak. Ketamine is one hell of a drug. Treat this sacrament with the respect that it deserves, and please, journey safe. Induced Transcendence, a peyote and meditation trip report by Medicine Man, posted to earwid.org January 4th, 2018. I was raised Southern Baptist. I've been in a place of death 4 times in my life, situations I should have died in but yet survived, accident or injury. I entered into this self-guided meditation with the use of peyote, with the notion to forget anything that I've ever been taught beforehand. My mind was open to anything and everything, so as I would be able to make the best decision for my spirit as a whole. I embarked on this journey to cure my chronic migraines, PTSD, anxiety and insomnia on a more holistic level. During the meditation, this report was prepared. The afterthought after 6 hours of rest and a clean mind follows. 11.7 dry grams of peyote was placed into roughly 40 capsules and consumed at 2 PM. End of major visual aids, 11:30 PM. The first few hours were negligible. Body temperature was high and I was clammy and sweating quite profusely. By 4 PM, I was preparing for my normal meditation practices. No answers in my head. I suddenly realised that the difference between man and men was we think. So I pulled a piece of paper in front of me on the floor and wrote the first thing that came to my mind. Bathsheba. I heard her name spoken a few times inside of my head. This was the point where I started to receive visual aids. I never saw Bathsheba, yet I felt her lustrous presence. She was sexy, and I've never ever seen her face. I asked her for a question. How do I increase my profits? The answer is in the hilt, was an automatic response. Inside of my mind, a beautiful sword appeared, curved at the top. On the flat of the blade, I could see past the weapon itself and see an image in the blade. I'd found my answer. I thanked Bathsheba for a time as she spun the sword seductively between her fingertips. Still no face, no body, just mere essence. As I turned to leave the room, feeling oddly satisfied and 100% reassured of myself and my new plans, however, extremely dissatisfied with not being able to even help myself imagine a manifestation of energy, I saw myself in the mirror. This became meditation stage number 2. With my nose pressed against the clean glass, I now stared into the eyes of a man, inches back from the glass on his side. I found myself observing myself not as myself. I became increasingly attractive, sexy, powerful. I found myself so attracted to me that I physically wanted myself. I began lusting after myself. At this point my wife knocked and came in the room. I immediately was overwhelmed with jealousy. I was angry at her for interrupting this only time I had with her. The winds were shifting outside, which was the reason for the intrusion. As I came outside to admire another possible freak storm, I saw Bathsheba's jealousy transform into a beautiful storm cell, producing a massive funnel cloud sideways of the main branch of clouds. It appeared prominent enough that everyone in the family, me being the only one on peyote, could see it, and we were all taking pictures. Out of this storm fell some hail. One hail in particular landed directly in the palm of my hand, and then bounced to the ground. I picked it up and saw a good-sized, beautiful piece of hail, enveloped in a larger piece. I placed this piece in my mouth after pictures and show and tell. The taste was out of this world amazing. Granted, I had been fasting since consumption. However, the burst of water when it melted quenched my thirst until midnight. It was the most special gift I have received. As I watched the storm, it was clearly apparent to me that this storm was a direct action of jealousy. Not only did my old friend Bathsheba help guide me, she wanted me for herself. I sat outside, enjoying the jealousy of this spirit, when I began to see tiny things in the air. If the background was right, and you had the ability to see beyond what you were seeing, this is where you will find this life. Millions of tiny bubbles of light. Naturally, I became euphoric and giggly. My first time in my life seeing something that isn't truly there. Or was it? Well, which I now know, it was. After initial glance, I was able to see them easier and easier if I look at them correctly. Once they became apparent all around me, I noticed they were not randomly moving around. What I thought was chaos of particles were the very fibers of life itself. It takes tens of thousands of millions of these bubbles to make up one atom, so I have read. These bubbles were in a pattern, grouped together, and they were pulsing. Everything in our universe operates in a frequency of vibrations and pulses. A constant beat emitted from our sun, somewhat similar to the heart. A group of 6 groups or so, very hard to identify how many exactly, will be orbiting around each other. Still then pulse, still then pulse, orbiting themselves but never touching. They reminded me of gnats in the air. If I looked at a darker background I couldn't see them, but a lighter one like the sky, I could make them out. What is quite peculiar is that they are unaffected by the physical elements. It was high winds, yet they remained constant, unchanged, unaltered. Floating there, orbiting, pulsing. It rained, and still they remained the same, ever so constant. Sitting down and gazing into this matter that I was being able to see, I realised this wasn't the first time I've seen these bubbles. I've had a fair few head traumas over the years, and when I get hit in the head hard, I see this life out of my peripheral vision, everywhere except the spot I'm directly looking at. Some may appear to be U-shaped, although they're transparent, but translucent enough to be visible to the naked eye, possibly third eye at this point. I fixed upon this gaze and in wonderment at the newfound world around me, and spotted one small cluster, slightly bigger than the rest that never moved, until I physically noticed it. Once I tried to focus directly on it, it would jerk away, lost into the millions of smaller bubbles. After many failed attempts, I was able to lock on to my newfound object, the direct centre of my pupil. Once locked into the gaze and looking inside of this cluster, it began to enlarge, pulsing. Each pulse was a larger image, all translucent but definitely there. With each of these enlargements came an adrenaline rush like that of a roller coaster. When it took over all of my vision, I was so adrenaline stacked I felt like I just jumped out of a plane. Then I blinked and lost everything. Surely I was about to see inside of myself if I could have hung on. I must not blink to be able to see this newfound dimension. Imagine looking into space at the stars. I blink, it shuts the shutter on my camera and resets the focus. I'm back at square one. The longer I keep my shutter open, the more and farther I shall see. It does hurt and tears roll down my face, but once I passed the first 3 tears swells, I was golden. I lasted over an hour without blinking for my first time ever. A fellow spirit suggested a dark room for my meditation purposes. This is where I turned my 5-foot closet into a vast universe, woven together with translucent prisms of soft light. Once inside of the eye, no blinking, I noticed that I had to remind myself that my eyes were open. It was more comfortable at this point to keep them open. To close them and keep them shut required effort. Leaving them open was easier. Inside of a soft glow, I was able to see inside and around. I witnessed a star inside of each prism of light. I think of prisms as square. These were not. They were round, soft fibres. When I ran my hand around the air, I was left with soft traces. I was creating my own fibres, pulsing colours by my actions. This is where I met fear, and also found myself. The search for my pupil again was the first thing on my mind in the dark room. Ecstatic for the knowledge that awaited me on the other side. Once I found it, however, I noticed a face in the dark, the size of the tiny bubbles. The more my eyes were opened, the bigger it became. I'd placed my back against the wall for a safety measure before I began. The face became massive, turned into something demonic, then a skeleton. It honestly terrified me, but I knew not to show it. With my back against the wall, I did what I always do in such situations. I jumped at it. Boo! Was all I could think to come up with on the spot. I'm not afraid of you. I see the face inside of the face and beyond, and it's me. Fear is product of my own imagination. It was at this point during the experience that I was recording my sessions via voice recorder. After I made this courageous move against myself, I realised that I was the only one there to begin with. There were no other manifestations in this realm. I no longer felt and will no longer fear the unknown any longer. It is now known. Unevolved minds are the only physical danger in our realm. Interesting tid. The brightest light of all is that which emits from our souls. The light being so bright that when I finally located my pupil, and I successfully transcended, I was blinded as if I just stared at the sun itself. The light was peeking from behind my eyes like there were moons during an eclipse. The light barely visible at its most outer edges. Everything related to the cosmos. After glorious lights and galaxies discovered, I stopped for a mirror meditation. The man that stood before me was me. I opened my gaze and began to see more than myself within myself. My face and features were slightly changing, the eyes always the same, yet they were not my eyes. Scars appeared all over my face. A dark shadow formed over my face and I saw the silhouette of a mushroom on my forehead embed inside of a prominent scar I really have. At this point I asked the question: future, past, or present? I saw my original scars protruding from the marks of these other souls. Old, ancient, bearded, always me, however not physically me, but my personality, my soul, all blended together. They were all clearly attached to me, and there were at least 3 faces. The last of the warriors had black rings around his eyes, painted perhaps, bruised or possibly aged. I saw hatred in their eyes, especially the dark-eyed. Hatred, violence, anguish, hurt. Once I recognized them as individuals inside of myself, I knew this was not the first time I had seen them. The dark-eyed man, when I was a boy. I remember those eyes telling me to stand up and fight in a life-or-death situation that my 15-year-old body had found itself in. Again, on an opponent after an affair discovered. All of my souls had something in common. The 7 deadly sins. My souls looked like they could use a little peace. Tired. They stood before in the mirror as if standing to be judged, not proud of their actions, yet damn sure not ashamed of them. One thing for sure though, I saw victors of battles won or yet to be won. I'm a leader, a man amongst men. It is my purpose, my being. This sit down with myself changed everything. We are recycled back into each other. Man and woman elopes, spawns a child. This new DNA has no soul, only body until one established themselves into it at birth. When one spirit dies, his soul will rise to be judged. Or we rise and have the ability to move on to other worlds and other hosts, or reincarnate back at birth. Earth is the place designed by God to die. From the ashes we were made, and from the ashes we will return. This is the place where shit goes to die. We are the only mortal beings. Our purpose is to one day die, it's a fact. So with that being said, we live in hell as we recycle back into planet Earth. We continually deplete our planet's resources to the verge of wasteland. Our hell could be a nuclear holocaust filled with plague, famine, disease, or it could be the beach in Hawaii. The choice is ours as a people, as a divine spirit. It is our mission to prefabricate the walls we find ourselves in, to promote healthy living amongst our people. The wars we face today are not biblical. They are merely us doing what we cannot do, getting along. World peace could be the only answer. Instead of nations, brothers. One family helping another family out. All citizens of planet Earth, all spirits of this world and possibly others creating life for life. We are our own creators. It is overwhelming that we are but ants on a molehill. The possibility that once released from this fleshy host, our spirit is released into whatever form we may choose wherever in the cosmos we may choose, if we're lucky enough to have a choice. However, here we are for a reason, to evolve our minds to a higher level of enlightenment, to help our brothers and sisters across our lands to find a more holistic and healthy approach to life as we know it, to start turning hell into a metropolis. Afterthought, the storm of jealousy. Outside, after observing this beautiful storm, I began to see my first time ever visual aids. I began to see these little gnat-like creatures flying around everywhere, but I could only see them against a light background. Upon feeling very euphoric and giggly and ecstatic of finally seeing results, I began to fix my gaze just right. I must look beyond what I see to see what is really between what I see. With the gaze just right, my third eye opening up, I began to notice that these small globes of light bubbles were centralized together in groups and were orbiting themselves at a fast pace. Never did they touch. They would move in pulses, vibrations if you will. The wind picked up, and I noticed that these particular light bubbles were unaffected by our physical elements, never changing. Your body passes right through them, yet they remain pulsing. I spotted my pupil hanging out with the other light bubbles. When I attempted to look directly at it, it would jerk away. If you looked at it in your peripheral, it began to get larger at each pulse, until it took over my entire vision screen. With that came a large roller coaster of adrenaline. So much as it broke my gaze at the very end, I blinked. I'm sure if I was able to hold on a moment longer, I would have been looking right inside of myself. I'm sure what was happening was my pupils were dilating back, and I was entering my third eye, or inner eye, as I think it should be better termed. The dark room. So finding the darkest of places is the challenge. Little lights began to appear throughout the room. It was difficult to remember that my eyes were wide open as if they felt shut. I virtually could see nothing inside of the dark room. Locating my pupil, my inner eye, was difficult at first. During the search, I realized the brightest of lights were being emitted from inside of my inner eye. Upon realization of this light, other mysterious fabrics of light began to materialize. I began to see a face. I felt the initial reaction of fear. Every apparition that was visible to me was being produced out of fear inside of myself. I asked Bathsheba if she was present with me, and asked her for assistance to remove the fear blockage so that I could continue to be enlightened. At the disappearance of fear, I began to realize that everything that I was seeing around me is always happening. Only now I had the gift to be able to see it in live action. Life at its purest form. Perhaps since everything is always happening continuously, any spirits would not be able to see me. I was granted the power to observe life at its most elementary elements. Keeping my third eye open and focused is a tough skill, especially for a young soul to attain. Everything directly and easily were identifiable and directly related to the cosmos. Once I noticed and acknowledged the presence of fear, it immediately evaded me, possibly forever. I began to dissect fear in itself. The only thing to fear on this realm is mankind, and not to fear them, but learn from them, and be wary of human nature and its tendency to kill off its host in the most inhospitable way. A prominent haze of soft green lights, as if suspended in air, appeared before me solid and steady, readily visible from my newfound vision. They were soft and barely visible, yet they're none the same and ready for me to observe. Once my focus was fixed upon the new light, as I was able to see sideways into the light, inside of it, a galaxy of its own. Stars, including one in particular, emerged. It reminded me of the North Star. I felt as if inside of me I had realised that we are infinite and everything around us is infinitive within itself. At this point I began to notice traces being left in the air, after moving my invisible hand through the matter before me. Only 3 colours were prominent: red, green, and sometimes blue, all soft. Hard to describe with words the fabrics of space and time that I was able to perceive in that moment. Once my third eye was open, it became increasingly easier to refocus on the object at hand and increase my gaze using my vision, to not only see what is in front of me, but what is between me. These objects, orbs of light, are ever constant, unchanging by the physical elements in front of us, the same as the essence of life that I witnessed outside. I wished at this point I had learnt how to meditate without blinking as I did a few hours after this experiment, as I am positive my visions would have been deeper. I began to see light traces of essence, noceums, vibrating and pulsing as they did outside, orbiting themselves in a binarial pattern. Once I was seeing inside of the dimension, I would always see distant red dots like planets, in a rotational path with something, and yet moving as the essence of life does, to a pattern, a binaural beat of some nature. The visualization of life around me clearly somehow made it 100% aware in me that I was utterly alone. My spirit nor souls had no apparent friends in this realm, which saddened me. I saw no physical manifestations of energy or life. I felt as if my spirit was alone in the cosmosphere. There were no other spirits with my capabilities of communication. I completely and comfortably debunked any supernatural feeling or superstition that I have attained in my life. I even attempted to strike fear into a prism of lights that appeared, and they remained unaffected. Listening to the recorder on my phone, I could hear the background noise of someone in the house speaking clearly. During my darkroom meditation, I heard nothing except the distant humming of the sun. The brightest light seemed to be coming from inside of my inner eye, as if my eyes were planets blocking the sun in an almost perfect eclipse. Mirror meditation. Sitting upright in front of my mirror, I pressed my nose against the glass and slowly moved backwards, observing myself from a different perspective. The more I gazed, the more my flat reflective became a 3D man staring back at me. I noticed deep inside of my eyes there appeared to be a small light in each pupil. Gazing into this light transformed my eye into a crazy cat-eye looking appearance, then into a spinning, pulsing, orbiting essence, much like that of the noceums outside. My left eye seems to not be as strong as the right. Most feeling is in the right. No light in the mirror proved no results or clarifications. I began to stare at just myself. I felt hatred inside of the eyes looking back at me, and then all feelings of emotions were gone, and I was just there, ready to observe. As the different characteristics began to take form on my face, I felt not fear nor discovery. I felt as if I knew what was coming. Scars appeared to promenade all over my face. My beard grew longer as I focused my gaze into his eyes. Stare at yourself in the mirror for long enough and you will find yourself staring at someone other than yourself. I notice these are not my eyes as I look into them. Same shape, same colour, yet not mine. I know not of the tale nor the life, but I have seen the faces within. Scars appeared all over myself, weathered. I asked him why so much hatred. No response. I felt as if I could possibly communicate with this soul directly if I only knew how. 3 faces inside of my own, each different but still the same. I began to pay particular attention to the original scars which I know I created in my life. As I observed, I noticed scars forming not only under my own, but over them as well, meaning that not only is this a soul from my past, but one in the future as well. As I realized this, my eyes grew dark rings around them, almost black with age. Scars appeared all over my face. A large mushroom began to appear, perhaps painted on my forehead, as if the cap were pointed towards a particular direction in the sky. The mushroom was embedded in one of my deep, natural, I really have this one, scars across my forehead. Lines began to trace across my face to form some sort of half-face mask helmet, yet the beard remained and grew longer. I believe to have experienced my first ego death in this moment. I was suddenly rather keen to the notion and idea that when we die, we recycle back to birth, Earth being hell. Our hell was once roamed by massive creatures, dinosaurs, that would shred a human to pieces. Out of the pits rose the civilization of man. Thus meaning, if we are recycling amongst ourselves, our hell could just as easily be a paradise instead of a nuclear wasteland. The choice is ours. Although this information changes everything. It doesn't change anything because everything is irrelevant though. Within my spirit was past, future and present. 3 individual souls of the same spirit. Me. 1 Corinthians 12:12 unity and diversity in one body. For as the body is one as many members, but all the members of that one body being many are one body, so also is Christ. Dark room number 2. So here is where I experienced the same lights and fibres of before. No newfound knowledge, just more wonderment to how the cosmos reacts around us daily. I am but an infant on the very foothills of knowledge itself. I felt myself trying to keep my eyes closed. They grew so heavy I couldn't close them, they just stayed open. After 3 drops of tears from eyes remaining open, the pain of not blinking disappeared completely. My face grew numb and cold, and my feet and hands well began to numb out. My breath, no longer an issue in my mind, began to slow. My breath was so faint, yet it was enough to keep me going. My eyes had never felt so open. I imagined my eye as a shutter on a camera. The longer it remained open, the farther and deeper I'll be able to see. Every time I blink, I reset the focus on my inner eye. The pressure in my head was being released out the back of my skull and out of my mind wide open. I was wide open to the world. I remember feeling as if I could leave this body, if I only had the knowledge and return. But the fear of my physical body not being able to draw breath with me in it kept me slightly rooted. Not the fear of death per se, for that is irrelevant, but for the fear of humanity being left behind without access to this knowledge. This is the true form, as I believe, to open my inner eye during meditation, to see into the 7th dimension. I lost these visual aids around midnight, yet remained unblinking in a trance-like state until 6:30 the next morning. My head had never felt so full, as if my brain has been enlarged in a very comfortable way. What I learned: we are one spirit, but many souls, infinite within ourselves. The mortal body dies, it is its purpose. The soul is eternal and immortal, and as thus recycles into an available host, baby or organism. Reincarnation, for lack of a better word. I do not believe that animal spirits and humanoid spirits commingle. They do coexist as the very essence of life itself, and may partner to achieve happiness and a common goal. The question remains, are they the same soul regenerating into ourselves until our time of punishment is done? We were created in the image of our Maker, yet there are other makers as well. A more holistic lifestyle needs to be realized, and a planetary treaty should be reached to achieve the next stages of life. No longer countries and governments against each other, but brothers of the same planet, living in harmony with each other. More alternative options for fuel would be a great start. If we stop robbing our planet of the very life she provides, we would see a new growth and a new age of mankind. Perseverance, Curiosity and Fortitude, a 9-gram mushroom trip report from the Vivec Discord. It was a Friday night, 2.5 weeks after my 10-gram trip. I'd asked the mushrooms to test me to the fullest and give me the most intense experience possible. They gave me exactly what I wanted. Mushrooms are very generous in my experience. Sometimes you can ask and you shall receive, but what you want may not be what you think. I had about 12 grams of penis-envy mushrooms out ready to eat them all. I was on the phone with my best friend, and we were talking and preparing for the trip. He started to get very tired as I was getting ready to grind the shrooms down to a fine powder. This made me nervous, but I then realised a FaceTime trip sitter wouldn't do me very good in shroom world, while I was unconscious anyway. I waited until about 1 AM to start. I finally grind all the mushrooms into the fine powder I desired, and start putting the greyish-blue powder in yogurt containers, and start shoveling down the contents. The first spoonful must have been a whole gram, as the white yogurt turned deep blue. I ate the majority of the mushroom yogurt, and by the time the clock struck 2 AM, I was already feeling disoriented and was about to throw up. I can usually eat more than this if I want to, and I was on a decent 8-hour fasting session before the trip. All I had that day was a slice of pizza. I pick up the spoon to eat more, and drop the spoon onto the floor, spilling all the mushroom and yogurt contents onto it. Well, I guess that's enough for tonight, I said. There wasn't much in that yogurt container, so I took it as a sign that this will be plenty for tonight. I had about 3 grams of powder left over, so I can say I had about 9 grams down the gullet. I cleaned up my room a little, and I already started seeing visuals all over the room. I was tripping hard as hell, and I'd only just finished eating 10 minutes ago. At this point I had no idea if I ate 6 grams, 10 grams, I truly had no idea. But I did know that I was probably in for a ride if I'm having effects like this already. Then, the trip begins. I start to notice everything in my room moving in a circular motion in a GIF-like way. There are weird dots all over in a spiral, mainly black with some coloured dots. I have these bandanas in my room on the wall, and today my lights were off beside a light blue light, a pink LED wireless phone charger, and a reddish pink lava lamp. I noticed that my room is starting to change shape and move in very odd ways. The corners of the patterns on my bandana start to have thick white symbols on them, looking like a warped plus sign, almost like a swastika for some reason. The bandana now has an ancient alien language on it, and it is flowing like a river going clockwise. It is remarkably similar to the secret language in DMT trips. It did not feel demonic. It felt like those letters were the gates to the Akashic records, and my drawer looks like it is a matte charcoal black and is deformed and ominous. These are the most intense, cool, fascinating, and truly badass visuals I've ever seen at that point. I start to realise that my time in reality is almost up. I have the thought of a trip killer for a second, but I fight it off and say, I took the medicine, now it's going to have to do its work. I had to push through, and I asked for this experience. I put myself through this, and now I'm going to have to go through with it. I closed my eyes, and when I opened my eyes, I could barely make out my surroundings as everything was rainbows. I had a horizontal rainbow overlay in my vision that had every colour possible, and every object was made of rainbows as well. I felt like I was stuck in time, and no matter how hard I tried to move, I couldn't. My head was stuck mid-air. Time was frozen in the real world. My vision was lagging and blurring, so I closed my eyes and relax. I would then open my eyes again later to see my room looking like a different world, and I look at my ceiling to see everything is broken up and spinning like multiple kaleidoscopes. And then, just like that, full ego death hits, and I'm out. All I can see is an array of intense, colourful, 3-dimensional geometry coming at me, and an ancient Mayan soldier of some sort. I immediately thought I had finally pulled the last straw and overloaded my brain. I was dead in the brain. I had lost it forever, and I would be stuck here forever, in the afterlife. I then would go on to think about how much of my life I had thrown away by destroying my brain, and how disappointed everyone would be. Would people even care that I died though? Was it meant to be? Either way, I hope I'm not forgotten. I feel forgotten. Just another one gone in the wind. This was the ecosystem. Well, I definitely didn't think I would die here today. But it is what it is, and this is what it's like to die. Well, at least it's peaceful, I thought. This place is definitely familiar to my core existence, as if it's a part of me. I then break through. I would then go on and watch my own funeral. It was a summer day, clear skies, maybe mid-June. Everyone I had ever known was there. It was silent. It showed me everyone I knew in my life's reaction to my death and how I had died. I don't remember all of them, but some were sad and some were nonchalant, some happy at other druggies off the street. I do remember my principal was in deep sorrow and felt bad I died at such a young age. Then the vision switched to my dad. It must have been before he quit chewing, because he spits a dip out and says, "Dumbass kid," while standing over my casket. I immediately felt anger and sadness, but I did remain calm. I think this was a reference as to how I would feel, how I could never do anything in life. No sport, no good social life in the past, and I would always feel my father was never proud of me enough. Maybe I would never feel that he would be fully proud of me, to not be disappointed with something I had done, even after death. I still love my dad, and I know he still loves me. He just doesn't show it often, and I feel deep down he didn't expect me to turn out the way I did. A vague memory of my friends being very sad I died comes. I felt bad I'd left them to chase this other reality. But again, it is what it is. I felt everyone's emotions in my brain as one new, intense and heavy emotion. I would go on to live the life as my Spanish teacher and could speak fluent Spanish. I also lived in other people's lives. I was fairly hazy as to what I did in these lives that I had, but I did know that I'd had them. I also vaguely remember being shown world problems and other worlds briefly, trying to show me there is a beyond to this world, even if we cannot reach it any other way. That this world is a mask to the universe's secrets. No real details to remember though, unfortunately, and I then was able to open my eyes in real life. My vision was waving and curling and turning in a circular motion with an extremely fast pace, and there was light blue all in my vision, and I could hardly even tell it was my room I was in. My vision was also shaped weird. My point of view was not circular like usual, it was restricted. I could see the whole room when most of my outside vision was covered in indescribable hallucinations. It's a bit like a pinpoint, although I could still make out everything perfectly fine. I could not feel my body, as it felt transparent and like anything could pass through it. I mainly felt like a tiny head laying on a bed with no body. I went back into the trip, and I realised I'd been breathing heavily the whole time running through worlds. After this, I hear my dog come upstairs in the real world, and I enter a dully lit aquamarine room, and I was locked inside while seeing myself in the third person. I then thought that I'd gone into psychosis, and fell on the floor in my room and could see me on the floor in the trip. My dad starts yelling at me for taking mushrooms and going crazy, and I then realise I'm still on the bed and I'm doing just fine. I look around my room and I see that my room has turned into a club, and the song What's Brackin' by Juice WRLD was playing in my eyes with perfect accuracy, down to every last lyric to beat. After this, I start to wake up. I was still deep in the trip, and I was placed in a scenario of running a race, fighting for my life while Barry Bonds by Juice WRLD was playing as my outro song to complete the final task of the trip. Fairly ironic. A test of my strength, will and worthiness to live. I heard the voices of loved ones cheering me on to make it out. Was I even worthy of living? I would have to push on for my life to find out. I finally am able to open my eyes and am completely gone. Maximum level stage ego loss. I was heavily breathing and couldn't move as I was feeling extreme Alice in Wonderland syndrome effects, to the point I thought my head was the size of a globe, and my body the size of a phone. I take a deep breath, put my hand in my head, and process everything that had just happened in pure disbelief. Although, I must say, I knew what would happen and was extremely grateful for my experience, but I am happy I'm back. I get up to have a piss when I'm able to, and after taking a few videos of myself and almost falling through my mirror into an abyss, I notice my face is changing shapes, and my facial features are growing and shrinking to the point that I'm not even human anymore. This is all occurring at about 4:45 AM. All of this went down in the space of 2 hours and 45 minutes. I would then ride off the rest of the trip, I had extremely awesome visuals and the most intense and euphoric body high ever imaginable. After the peak is where you can fool around a little and have some fun, in my opinion, even on a dose like that. I would continue to see freaky things like my dad standing in my doorway at the corner of my eye, and he would disappear when I looked. I noticed my COD World War II posters looked like the soldier was alive. It showed emotions. It was like it was looking at a live person. Kind of like the paintings that are alive in Hogwarts, except I couldn't communicate with my poster at all. His hands were turning into faces and bodies and a lot of other really cool but freaky things. The corner of my room had a smiley face on it, and everything was deeply vivid in colour. All of these colours were changing, and had an angel-like dust floating around the out-of-place colours in my room. Everything was also intensely wide. It was as if a camera was in my eyes. It would look normal size, but when in the trip you feel everything is 3 times bigger and wider, and you're a giant in slow motion. Also, when I looked at lights, they had a glare to them. Diffraction is the term on Psychonaut Wiki. The diffractions would change into random geometric shapes every second. Circle, heart, square, triangle, even things that looked like a tesseract. My traces must have lasted 5 seconds at least. It looked like I would see things a second after they happened. The floor looked like it was about to float off as well. Don't ask me how, it just did. Everything was so intense yet simple. It was the perfect way to end a trip, honestly. I did feel incredible. Sometimes with psychedelics, it really is a journey of going through hell to experience heaven. Never fight it. Always try to ride with the flow, and understand that this is all happening for a reason. Divine Intervention. A 4HO MIPT trip report by Rough Guppies. Posted earbud.org, October 12, 2021. Dose: 12 mg of 4HO MIPT fumarate at 147 pounds. Background. This was my first time taking 4HO MIPT. I'm sensitive to most substances, and sometimes extremely sensitive, which is why I chose to take what I thought would be a small dose. I've used psychedelics for several years. Most of my experience is with 1-PLSD, psilocybin mushrooms, and I've also had 3 low-dose San Pedro trips, as well as numerous smoked DMT trips, and 1 experience with 4-ACO MET. I had a playlist prepared. For weeks I'd been researching this substance. I was set to dose in the evening with my girlfriend as my sitter. I weighed out 12 mg of 4HO MIPT and stirred it into a clumpy suspension in water. This substance does not readily dissolve into water. Let me tell you, it didn't taste very good. It was quite a lot like L-tryptophan. The first alerts happened in less than 10 minutes. My vision started warping and it was hard to see details clearly, somewhat like being drunk. The come-up was rapid and distressing, and I became very anxious and worried about just how fast it was happening. Because just a few minutes prior, well, I was completely sober. I started breathing heavily and became worried about what I'd got myself into. I didn't intend for this to be a strong trip, nor did I expect the possibility considering the dose. I was extremely restless and developed a lot of gastrointestinal distress, which then caused me to panic and become paranoid. I even thought I'd taken the wrong substance. My girlfriend reassured me I was safe and reminded me that we had tested the substance with colorimetric reagents not long before and confirmed its identity. The effects were unfamiliar and at this point did not remind me of psilocin. It seemed to peak 45 minutes from dose, but it could have taken as long as an hour. I finally calmed down when the overwhelming and rapid come-up ended, but my emotions continued to sway back and forth between quite pleasant and quite unpleasant. At points, I truly wanted it to end. The body load was rough, and I had tremors and was very cold for most of the experience. It had been years since I'd last taken mushrooms, and I was hoping this experience would have some of the mushroom essence that I valued and missed so much. While many aspects were different from how I remember psilocin, the overall character felt the same. In comparison, 4-ACO-MET, which is considered adequately similar to psilocin by many, left me very disappointed with how utterly unlike psilocin it felt. However, 4-HO-MIPT brought me back to the same beautiful place psilocin brought me during my very first powerful psychedelic experience. Said to my girlfriend that it was just like it was the first time. I felt like I'd come home after so very long, and that the spirit of the substance loved me and was taking care of me. I knew I was in good hands, and wept as I told my girlfriend how grateful I truly was. In the time since my early experiences with psilocin, I've used various other psychedelics, predominantly 1-PLSD. Comparing 4-HO-MIPT to psilocin is difficult. It's been a long time since I'd taken psilocybin mushrooms, and I was inexperienced when I was taking them. Similar to psilocin, I went back and forth between relaxation and laughter, between anxiety and comfort. This substance produced strong visual hallucinations, but unlike with DMT, they were neither incredibly vivid nor central to the experience. Nevertheless, they were novel. My body and surroundings changing form was the most prominent sensory hallucination. I often felt as though my body was water, especially when I was crying. I turned into a complex waterfall scene on the side of a mountain. Colours on surfaces in the room shifted through the spectrum. However, colours were not super vibrant with eyes opened or closed. There were auditory hallucinations similar to DMT which unsettled me because of my mixed experiences with it. My DMT trip started novel and fun, although not profound, and ultimately became disturbing, grotesque, and even malevolent towards me. The 4-HO-MIPT-induced auditory hallucinations that I found particularly uncomfortable were loud, menacing beeps and clicks, similar to the sonar of a pod of dolphins or the wispy synthesizer sounds of jazz fusion. When the music became quiet or between songs, these sounds became very audible. Because of the sonic dissonance, along with the association I drew to DMT, I was not seriously happy about hearing them. I ultimately came to see this as a test of my mindfulness and my ability to fully let go. I repeatedly confided in my girlfriend for reassurance that everything was okay and that I was safe. I saw these unpleasant aspects to be a test of my ability to truly surrender with full trust and faith. Once I realized that the spirit of the substance was testing me, my perspective shifted. It showed me that I did not truly understand. This intelligent guiding force was beyond my capacity for understanding. Instead of an experience of total clarity, which I'd felt on other psychedelics, this was a humbling experience that showed me the pointlessness in trying to understand things which were completely beyond me, and instead, I should just have faith. The tribulations of the experience were both a test of my faith and a way for the presence to show itself to me and let me know that I had more to learn and grow from. When I realized this, it was like the spirit revealed itself to me directly. The presence manifested itself and was divine and loving. It proved to me how small I am. I'm not a religious person per se, nor was I raised religious, and I've never and still don't believe in a god or gods, which made this experience unanticipated and stunning. In total awe and wonder, I felt the humbling presence of God. I said to my girlfriend, "I know that I truly do not know. This feels like God." This really was an experience of divine intervention. I've had the experience of a loving presence on psychedelics before, especially with psilocin, and I've encountered entities on DMT, but this experience elicited the strongest feeling of a powerful other. I thought it would be ridiculous for the ancients and modern indigenous groups who use psilocybin mushrooms to regard their consumption as anything other than consuming the body of God. The feeling of this presence was persistent throughout the experience. For what felt like a long time, I was crying and smiling at my girlfriend in total astonishment. Whether or not this presence was actually conscious itself or simply perceived as such is not important to me, because I do not believe that any consciousness has a self or ego at the centre of it. It was just love that was felt. I began coming down 2 hours from the dose. I hugged my girlfriend tight, thanking her for helping me through the experience, and with eyes closed, I felt my body turn into multiple flowering vines which wrapped around her. For the duration of the come down, I was hungry but had no appetite. And still, later into the night, it hadn't returned. I felt very positive and relaxed, despite being very sore and having a headache. I gradually continued coming down for another 2 hours, at which point I took a small dose of kratom. I felt pretty much baseline at 5 hours from dosage. I had no trouble falling asleep and awoke feeling rested and refreshed. What a substance, and what an experience to behold at such a small dose. This felt long overdue. This experience was incredible and beautiful, and unlike any other experience I've ever had, but was not without its challenges. The presence of my girlfriend was reassuring and crucial to my ability to feel safe and give in to the experience as a whole. I have nothing but reverence for this amazing substance. Sex with God in Deep Space. A DPT and 5-MeO-DMT trip report by Viz. Posted to earbud.org, March 16th, 2012. Earbud note. While the author at first reports the substances used as DPT and 5-MeO-DPT, he later reports obtaining DPT and 5-MeO-DMT. 5-MeO-DMT and 5-MeO-DPT are different substances. The first substance used is categorized as 5-MeO-DMT based on contextual clues. However, because 5-MeO-DPT is mentioned in the initial paragraph, the identity of the substance is unclear. Background on tryptamine drugs especially. This report is mostly about DPT, but also contains a little information on a 5-MeO-DPT experience that I had during the same time frame, within days of each other in fact, which for me might be significant, since I rarely do this anymore. I'd always had positive effects with hallucinogens. I ate a lot of Hawaiian wood rose seeds when I was a teenager. I was a loner and suffered from bipolar depression, mostly depression, and this drug made me feel very connected to the universe, everything, and everyone in it. Something I intensely did not feel otherwise. I did not have access back then to mind drugs other than pot, which made me very paranoid and antisocial, I must say. I've since done mushrooms about 10 times, always with amazing effects. Again, I had a great love and connectedness with everything and everyone. I did acid several times. Depending on the setting, it was incredible or a little too much. It was a little too long and intense with lingering closed-eye visuals for me compared to psilocybin. But overall, I enjoyed it. Never, ever had a bad trip either, on any of these substances. In my early 20s, I became addicted to meth. For about a year, I was working long hours doing construction and was introduced to this substance by a co-worker. I'd never really heard about the disastrous effects. This was the early 80s Bay Area. Thankfully, I got myself out of all that, as well as getting myself back into school and becoming pretty successful, etc. All during this time, I had cycling moods, periods of great depression, as well as taking mood stabilizers, antidepressants, and occasionally Valium or Xanax. In grad school, I substituted working out for drugs. I'd always been very unathletic, but I discovered that I had a talent for endurance sports and became an elite triathlete. I was training many hours per week. After several years, I started having chronic injuries and obtained Percocet to help me train through it. Pretty soon, I was on and off again, on again, and on again, off again opiate addict, favouring IV OxyContin but using every kind of pill, pod, patch, or whatever I could get. During a clean period, about 7 years since I'd done any psychedelics, a friend made a connection and asked for some DMT. Instead, he was able to get some 5-MeO-DMT and some DPT. So we tried the 5-MeO first. My friend vaporized a very small amount of this aluminium foil horn-like thing we had devised. He took a very small pinch, placed it on the foil, and then finally took his hit. He did not initially look high or otherwise affected. I tried talking to him. He told me to wait, that I had to enjoy this. He just described it as a mild buzz. Well, I put a much larger, 10 times pinch, perhaps 15 milligrams or more on the foil, and despite his warning about the quantity, took a huge hit, vaporizing entirely all at once. Immediately, the foil turned green. It condensed to a ball, disappeared, and I fell into a giant white hole with no hope of escape. I had no vision, completely blind. I started moaning, "Oh, I'm gonna die. Why am I so extreme? Why did I have to take so much? Why do I have to do Ironmans and shoot Oxy?" I started rolling around on the floor, my friend trying to help me. After what seemed like an eternity, but was actually only about 20 minutes, I started to come out of it. I felt a hint of mushroom-like warmth and a feeling of familiar trypto experiences. This lasted for another half hour or so, and I was pretty shaken up after it subsided. The next couple of days were difficult. I questioned my life and my compulsion and addictions. I had minor closed-eye visuals for days following. Even so, of course, I needed to try the DPT. From all accounts, it sounded mellower, or at least friendlier. We first insufflated a small amount of powder, mass measured a moderate-sized line each. After 15 to 20 minutes, we were both coming up. Music sounded like a part of me, more so than with psilocybin, even though the effects were relatively mild. After a while, we wandered around my yard looking at things, ordinary things like leaves, that were becoming extremely fascinating. Without a logbook, I cannot say how long the effects lasted, perhaps 2 to 3 hours, from liftoff to almost complete come-down. Now, the second time was the wild one. My friend had experienced the effects, found them interesting, but decided not to indulge anymore. 2 weeks following our first adventure, I loaded it 150 to 200 milligrams in a saline solution, filtered it through a 0.2 micron filter, and injected it deep into the side of my buttocks. I was alone this time, but was used to tripping alone. I knew not to expect visitors, so was relaxed in that, knowing I would not have to handle anything but the trip itself. The effects came on, fast and strong. I sat in my bed and decided that so long as I could stay in that friendly environment, I could ride this out, no matter what happened. I had candles in the room, and it was fairly soothing. I was in a good state of mind, excited to see what the increased dose would do. At 20 minutes, I was seeing very, very intense visuals. I'd never experienced visuals to this degree that many people do. Most of mine were pseudo-hallucinations that consisted of intricate patterns. These DPT visuals lit up in intensely bright neon, almost exactly like the old black light posters of my youth, and then intensified from there. In fact, the feeling and visuals started taking on a 60s kind of theme, with bright poofy fonts of neon writing floating across the wall. I saw Jimi Hendrix playing the Star-Spangled Banner with an enormous American flag, too large to fit in any real three-dimensional space behind him. I reach out for a glass of water on my bedside table, and shockingly discover that it has no weight to it. There was no sensation of holding it whatsoever, even though it was clearly in my hand. A very dissociated feeling indeed. From there, I left the room, and then the earth behind. I was deep, deep in the void. More without than within, as if I were deep in the universe, where there was no time or space, no meaning at all. I felt transparent and part of the ether. I felt the presence of God everywhere, transparent like me. Now, I don't normally think in terms of God, but that is honestly the best word I can think of to describe what I felt. The creative force was all through me, and all pervasive in the complete blissful emptiness. It was like the emptiness described by the Buddhists, what I strive for in my meditation, even though the mind was definitely still at work in this experience. Physically, back on Earth, I was still slightly aware of my physical body, although I mostly seemed to be residing in space. I felt this tremendous need to stretch, and a sexual need in my hips, groin, and anus emerged. Now, I'm not gay, and have some limited experience of girlfriends occasionally putting something in me, but not much, I must say. I felt my hands working autonomously. I had an erection, and in a physical manifestation of the transparent quality I felt in my mind, also in my body as well. I started to masturbate while pushing my entire hand up inside me. I felt as if I were being probed by God or vice versa. There was really no difference. We were one. When I came, it was indescribably blissful. I kept no official trip report, so I can't report the time when I returned to the point of being able to read the red glow of the clock and how much time had actually elapsed. But it was shorter than a psilocybin experience, I'm sure. The rate of blast-off, intensity of effect, and rate of come-down were all increased. Perhaps 2 hours of intense tripping, followed by a mellow warmth for an hour or two until bed. The next day, I felt nothing but wonder. The reintegration was not as difficult as it was with 5-MeO, although I did have a depleted feeling usually that I get after taking tryptamine drugs. What I experienced was largely in tune with what I believe is the ultimate nature of the universe to be like after death. So I was not frightened. I did not have a lot of questioning of the experience. I was just in total awe of the entire trip. I'd do it again, although I would probably reduce the dose. I'd like to see what mid-range doses are like. Alas, at this point, I have no access. Maybe someday. Visiting the 11th Dimension, an ayahuasca trip report by Deekster, posted to EARBUDS.org, March 10th, 2018. The setting. It had been 6 months since I'd last drank ayahuasca. I'd been blessed to know people who have trained in the art of brewing and working with the spirit of ayahuasca. I'd never actually visited the jungles of the Amazon, but I know a person who has, and with him, I've been lucky enough to have these experiences in my home country many times in a summer cabin in the middle of the woods by a lake. My friend contacts me. How about some healing session this weekend? I hesitated for a while. My friend suggested we do it the day after tomorrow. I was thinking of doing some LSD that weekend, like I'd done the past 2 weekends. Just some slight introspection, and maybe making music. But ayahuasca, now that's a completely different thing. Back of my mind, I had a memory of that first time, the roughest experience I've gone through in my whole life. It burned itself into my retinas. The healing that happened that night was something so deep and in my face that I will never forget it. I let go of a lot of darkness that night. I said, sure, let's say a preemptive yes. He asked, maybe we can go to the summer cabin. It was the beginning of summer here in the northern parts of the world. Plants starting to come alive and the sun was finally here. Why not? So we decided, let's do it. It's a new moon on the weekend, we will drink then. 2 days to prepare for ayahuasca felt a little short, but I had this attitude that I've done it before, I can take it. Preparation. On Saturday we arrived at our summer cabin. We decided to drink during that night, Saturday to Sunday morning with the new moon. We placed some mattresses and blankets out in front of the fireplace outside. Now, the first time I'd contact with ayahuasca, I wouldn't actually call it drinking, because the mix was so light and it barely even worked, so I don't count it. But the first time I had contact, I heard the spirit of ayahuasca talk to me. Welcome, old friend. I'd also remembered I'd experienced working with ayahuasca in previous lives, and I could remember being a shaman and a healer in many lives before this. I had some kind of innate experience of working with this plant, and with these states, although I had relatively little experience in this current physical life. So we begin the process late in the night, about 10 o'clock. The sun has not yet even set down, it's relatively light outside. The blue sky scattered with clouds, the tall birches looming around above us, fireplace in front of us, by the side of our cabin. My friend sets up the altar table by the fireplace. Some Palo Santo, Aqua de Florida, the small cup covered in ayahuasca Icaro patterns. I put a banana as a gift to the spirits of the forest there, some white sage and my Jew harp. I have my trusty drum with me also by my side and some shakers on the floor beside us. My friend has his flute. I begin drawing a magic circle around us with the white sage, so that only those who are of highest good to us can enter the circle. My friend takes the wings of a bird and the Palo Santo and signals me to stand up. He cleanses my body with the Palo Santo, and I do the same to him, Then, we sit down. He takes the plastic bottle containing the black goo-looking drink, smokes some mapacho, authentic jungle tobacco, at the same time. He asks me, "How much do you want then?" I feel deep intuitively. Reaching out for the amount to drink, visualizing it, and get the number and vision of the cup filled to 3/4 parts. I tell him the number, and he fills the cup to 3 birds, blowing mapacho smoke on top of the cup after filling it. He gives me the cup. I know again this is it. Here I am, holding the cup again. The feeling of respect fills me for a while. Time stops for just a couple of seconds as I realise what will happen after drinking it. I hold the cup to my head just for 10-20 seconds, asking to connect with its energies. Then I take the cup and quickly drink it. Ugh. The taste is more bitter than I remembered. I can feel the brew going into my stomach, making me twist my face as I taste its bitterness and earthy taste. The aftertaste makes my whole body react to it. I take a sip of water to wash it away. This bitter taste resonates in my mouth for a long time after drinking it, and they say the taste gets more bitter each time drinking. But now it is done. There is no going back anymore. Contact with the plant spirit. We sit down in silence, waiting for the effects to begin. I put more wood in the fire. After maybe 20 to 30 minutes, I start to feel the effects. A calming effect of being here in this place again. A feeling of somebody approaching me occurs, like a space out of nothingness forming inside me. I close my eyes and I can feel different inside me. The voice of the plant starts to quietly talk to me, like a voice coming from a faraway place approaching me slowly more and more. I concentrate on the voice. It's not something I hear, but something I sense on a telepathical level. "Welcome, so glad to see you are here again, bravely drinking without critical need. This time it will be more about regular maintenance. Relax, it's going to be easy and comfortable." The voice and presence of another gets stronger and stronger. The plant speaks more and more to me. I can remember it having a sense of humour, jokingly declaring things even a bit pokey, but with good taste and a feeling that this being has an interesting sense of humour. My intentions for the journey. Slowly during the onset, I remember my intentions for this time. I had 4 intentions for this journey. To recover a lost part of my son's soul, to heal my knees, and 2 other things related to my personal issues that I can't remember now. I kept repeating these now while the voice was still clear and everything pretty much calm around me. I asked for answers and solutions for my questions. 4 is good, all of your wishes will be fulfilled. This was the message I got. Some time passes and I can feel clearly like the spirit of the ayahuasca asking us to call her. I can clearly see the call, that we need to ask for healing, feel it in fact. I wait nervously some time to open my mouth, or maybe even over-respect the space of my friend in this state. "I'm going to sing now," I say quietly. And so, I start singing, asking for healing from the spirit of ayahuasca, and protection from the great spirit of ayahuasca. I repeat this until my song feels like it is over. Still, time passes, and the effects are now stronger in my body. I can clearly feel being in a strong meditative state. I still feel that the ayahuasca requires us to actively ask for it to fully come on. I wait for a while and not say anything, and I get, "Fine. Well, ayahuasca will come when you begin to ask for it." I wait and try to sense what my friend is thinking. Is he sensing the same thing? And quickly, he starts to sing some song. Calling for ayahuasca, I take my drum and join in the song. I drum and listen. We create the space together, calling for the spirit to come on and be present with us. And she comes. I can feel her in our presence. She is very close now. I can feel part of me saying words out of this world, and I try my best to let go and let these words come out. Alien words come through me, their meaning probably something to do with thankfulness and gratefulness. I lose myself for a while. Then my mind comes back, and I stumble with some of the sentences coming through me a bit. But she is here. I can definitely feel her. I see a feminine figure in front of me in the fireplace with my eyes closed, hovering in front of us. Letting go. I feel intuitively that it's time to let go. I put down my drum, lay down, relax, and begin to let go. With a tip from another good friend, an old soul, I tell the spirit of ayahuasca, I permit access to all interfaces within me, outside me, on all levels of my existence. so that they may be used for the healing and betterment of my highest good on all possible levels. I repeat this phrase 3 times, giving access to all the methods and ways that the plant could heal me. And immediately after those phrases, I feel a sudden change. My body is completely relaxed. I don't feel tension anywhere. Even my deep inner thigh muscles feel completely relaxed. Suddenly, I feel the spirit of ayahuasca starting to work on me. Not inside me like previous times, but outside of my physical self. I could feel its healing starting from the outside, from the very borders of my existence, from the very borders of the vast being that is I. Ayahuasca was starting to do its work. From the edges of those interfaces that are connected to me, ayahuasca was starting to heal me. At this point, I kinda lost memory and sense of time. I had the great feeling of being just completely immersed into a healing process. I could feel and hear mechanical drill-like sounds coming from around my head in many, many places. Buzzing loudly, like drilling out heavy energies from my head, but not in a physical sense, but more of a cleaning my aura field sense. Or my other bodies than this physical one. But it's still very powerful. I could not focus on it. It was very much full of my face stuff, like going to the dentist. I don't want to focus on the drill drilling me, but anything else. The feeling was the same. I was focusing on something else while the plant worked on me. This all happened very quickly, and the last thing I can remember before completely blasting out of my body was the feeling of a hole being opened up in my head, and a big drill coming down into my head, cleansing the innards of my skull with great force. It felt like a hole being opened up, and somebody or something reaching inside my skull with an instrument of a mechanical, biological kind, and starting to clean the very innards of my head. Visiting the 11th dimension. At this point, I flew out of my body, still remaining conscious of my environment and my friend, but out of my body entirely. I went up, level by level, seeing on the way pyramid structures and shooting out of the tip of them, until I landed on a level where the travelling stopped. I could see a high energy place with huge amounts of energy going in all directions on a massive scale. In the distance, I could see another pyramid-like structure, and some being there channeling energy in all directions with high vibrant yellow, orange, blue and red colours. More close to me was another being, a big blue godlike character, a bit like the engineer character from the movie Prometheus, but in bright colour with a golden piece of armour, wearing a headpiece of some kind, crystalline of formation, pointing upwards into the sides in light blue crystal white colours. They sported a bright pink crystal on the centre of the head, its eyes bright cyan in colour. There was a feeling of hugeness that surrounded it, size that is not physical size but dimensional size, and he was telling me, "So, you've had the permission to see what it's like in the 11th dimension. Welcome. Look around you now as you can, as this is a very limited privilege. Learn, see, listen." In physical time, my being there was not long, but in a sense it felt like a very long time indeed. I could see how these beings in the 11th dimension were very powerful, godlike, but at the same time they were not beings like we think of beings. They were more complex systems of greater coherence than we can ever imagine here on the 3rd dimensional level. The energy there felt out of this world, so powerful and quick to move, like hyper energy, something almost too high frequency to even describe in this slow 3rd dimension. I saw some crystalline pyramid constructions there, how they operated, and how they channeled energy to all dimensions around them. Connecting these crystals between each other, I saw 2 of these pyramids, the other one being governed by this blue being, and at the other one I could sense a more feminine energy governing it, a more feminine being in the distance. Rays of light and high frequency vibrating lightning were pulsating between these pyramids. Quickly, my time there was over. I have no idea how long I was there. All the while I was being there, my body was being worked on by operators around me. Slowly, I was coming back down more to my body, and I could feel being back on my body, sensing my friend beside me. I laid there on the floor, and was completely overtaken by what I just experienced. I felt strange. Who was I, and where was I? Was the healing already over? I stood up to sit slowly, and I realised it was far from over. Sitting down, I could feel these blasts of energy coming through me like I was being electrocuted from the head level. These waves of electricity went through me from the sides of my head, through my spine and towards my leg. I started shaking involuntarily. I could feel this energy going through my nerves and making my muscles shake. This continued for a while. This series of shocks and then shaking until a very specific part of my body was completely relaxed from the operation. Then this process would continue to another part of my body, to different muscles. Waves of energy blasting through the sides of my head. I felt cold, but at the same time I got the confirmation that this is not coldness. It is the medicine doing its work. We had the fire going and it was a cool summer night, so I was not worried and continued on. After some time, I could relax for a while and take in heat from the fire. Put more woods into the fire and just be. But it was difficult to be, so I started to rock around a bit, to rock to the inner sound within me that was somehow singing. This movement put me into ease and let me process a bit of what had happened. Then the waves came again and again, taking huge yawns between these shocks where I felt that my jaw was almost dislocated and huge amounts of tension being released with these yawns. And in between, I would communicate with different spirits appearing while looking in the fire. A spirit of the forest coming to see what is happening, a spirit of a crocodile, and at some point, a high-dimensional being comes to my visions. Meeting with the 9th dimensional reptilian. A lizard being from the 9th dimension I got. I see him standing, floating to the right of me by the fire. A very conscious being, blue aura but still a body of a lizard, and I could see its tongue slithering. Its huge, wide blue and yellow snake eyes, a blue skin with an intricate pattern texture, very high level, but at the same time the physical form was very low level in a sense. I could sense its wants, needs, urges to capture, grab, mate and all these other primitive feelings, and at the same time the being could focus its being for times at while, for very high focus on the crown chakra and third eye area. This would make it become very zen, very calm, very Buddha-like in its stature. But it could not hold the focus for very long. It had trouble holding onto this form. I started to communicate with this being. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" I asked. "We are reptilians, and our evolutionary path has taken such an extreme form that we are now in trouble. We have evolved to such high-level lizards that it is difficult to step back from this form. We've gone so deep in this one function that it now drives us no matter what we do. But we are learning new ways to come together, to learn how to work in a more uniform manner, to become part of the galactic consciousness, the galactic community. Some of us have recognized the futility of our form, and in the end, it has led to eating each other, which is not very productive for the evolution of our species as a whole. So we are now evolving, moving away from our reptilian form to something completely different." We kept discussing that for a while. I was astonished to see such a contradictory form, very high level spiritually, and very old soul inhabiting this body, but still being limited by such animal-like needs. It reminded me of our own struggles as humans to evolve, and my own needs and the drive that leads me to follow those needs. Felt like it was a reminder that this is not something uncommon in the universe, and that there are many life forms working together to evolve as a whole, and dealing with the same issues. Coming together here on planet Earth, we come to connect, to channel these issues outwards and inwards from this planet to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, reminding me again the importance of this place, the role Earth has as a diplomatic meeting place. Meeting with the satanic cult. The discussion with this being slowly faded and he left my field. The turn of events quickly went to another direction. I could feel myself being pulled towards more sinister energies. There were these sounds hailing in the air like tritones of metallic guitar sounds, but still more purely sonic in nature, a bit like metal guitar played with trumpets, low basses combined with high notes as well, playing these short progressions of notes, all a bit off-tuned from each other, forming some kind of pulling energy, some kind of unharmonic field that is close enough to its harmonic counterpart to pull in my interest and my whole being. And at the same time, I started to see these dark beings emerge. These huge dark beings, twisted shapes, eyes red and white, staring in the darkness, only revealing parts of themselves by time. There were 3 of them at least. And a set of gates, like cemetery gates in front of me. Soon after this, the number 666 flashed before my eyes. I even had history of this number, understanding this number, seeing that it had been rebranded by the Christian society used for evil, and now I could feel it used to lure me into their energy, It is a very harmonic number, a number of manifesting energy on a physical level, and I could feel these beings using this form to their own personal uses, and the communication started. Come with us, feel the power. You could have this all. And I really could feel this power they were offering me. The immense power of being a part of a bigger thing than myself, of utilising the energy they had gathered, just waiting for me beyond the gates. A spokesperson stepped forwards, some kind of reverend wearing a priest's outfit. He presented himself to me and told me in telepathic messages, "You could have immense power if I just stepped in through those gates." But I had chosen my path already, and that is light. I projected light and love around me. Light and love towards these beings. They were very persistent, showing me more images of power, wealth. If I would just step through the gates, please. But I knew my position and what I'm doing here, and this is not my way. The way of darkness has a limit, and I've already gone through that limit before. No need to experience it anymore. I stayed in my own power and light, and slowly the cult left my vision of field, fetching the soul of my son. After this eerie vision, I could still hear those tritone voices playing as echoes. Slowly they went away, and I lied down there for a while, and then a feeling came. Now it's time to go with the drum. To travel with the drum and fetch a part of my son's soul. My newborn, only 6 months old, very afraid of water, always crying when put near water. A friend of mine, a healer, had told me that part of his soul was trapped, and now it was time to get it back. I took my drum and started listening carefully. Is it time? Is this meaningful? Is this correct? Yes. I started drumming away, just listening to what was coming, slowly. And suddenly, I was descending into the underworlds. Deep within the earth, not this earth, but some other place, other planet, other time. A place not inhabited by humans, but something else, humanoids of different kinds. I could actually hear my son calling. His soul being trapped within a swamp, deep within the ground. Stuck in a swamp with some beast-like beings also there with him. The skeletons around him. I got the vision he had been eaten by these beings and got stuck there. The trauma not letting go of him. And I started drumming more powerfully, more intentionally, pulling him upwards, encouraging him to come out of this place, to let go of the pain. I continued drumming for a long, long time. Slowly, very slowly, working with his soul, encouraging, loving and healing it, pulling the soul upwards. And finally, the soul let go of the pain and the trauma of this event that had led him to get stuck there. And I could see him, my son, a tall being over 2 meters tall, shining with light. He was very thankful, and I was almost in tears. I saw this part of him getting connected back to his oversoul, like a triangle formation, shooting itself from the tip of the triangle with pure light to a greater structure. And I could feel him becoming more whole, more himself, not afraid anymore. And I was very happy. Finally, it started to feel that most of the medicine had done its work. My body was more relaxed, no more shivering. Maybe 3 to 4 hours had passed now. I took the courage to stand and feel that maybe I could purge this thing inside me. I've never been able to vomit with ayahuasca, but I've managed to get rid of most of it through pissing. I go to the forest and I can feel the trees wanting what I have. So I give my ear into them and feel relaxed, like the liquid inside me had left me, removing most of the toxins within myself. So after this I go back to sit to the fire, and now the strangest part of my journey starts to begin. These beings, digital in nature, come to me. They start to show me things. I can feel them wanting to tell me something. I let go again, relax fully, just to be in total relaxation, and allow this information to come to me. They start to show me how a computer works, what kind of noise does a computer make, and how it works visually when it is calculating. I'm a programmer, a software developer, so I'm very familiar with computers. But now I'm starting to slowly transform into one. Feeling as I am the CPU, or witnessing the CPU and its memory operations in front of me, in what kind of sound a modern CPU does when it's computing. I can hear the harmony of countless bits being calculated, like a giant parallel clockwork of waterfalls, dropping down binary information in huge amounts, generating this high, and at the same time low-pitched sound. Slowly, I am transforming from my being into more deeper levels. These beings around me, digital elves, they show me how a GPU works, how it can take one number and replicate it around in a parallel with almost infinite bandwidth from my human viewpoint. Slowly, I turn into this GPU. I am the GPU for a while. I'm channeling this energy inside it, feeling, hearing how it is calculating information, and wondering, what the heck are we even doing with computers? Do we even have any idea what we're working with? Slowly, the visions of the CPU and GPU fade away, and I'm left in awe wondering what the hell just happened. With this information, also, somehow, my being transforms from the GPU to myself, and I can feel these beings showing me also how to utilize this same information to healing a dog that we have here with us, laying next to us. A dog who is old and who has bladder problems. I project myself inside the dog and see the cells there are not anymore reproducing. There is stagnation happening inside the energy circulation in the liver area, or where the urine forms. Somehow, I utilize this parallel GPU model to the energy distribution of this urine system inside my friend's dog, and the energy starts to flow, and I feel the dog getting better. And I also sense that he's going away soon, leaving this place. He's already old, 15 and 16 years, but the healing continues, and I feel it is over. Suddenly, I see the dog's face staring at me. He is a puppy suddenly, a small enthusiastic puppy jumping around happily, ears flopping, great energy. It's like he's thanking me, and I'm glad, just laughing. Slowly, I get back to this earth more, and the experience starts to wade. The healing was done. All that is left now is enjoying this afterglow and playing some dew harp for the forest spirits watching us there. We go back to sleep slowly, and tomorrow wake up refreshed, happy, and clean. We wonder about what happened yesterday, as well as changing stories and just being in the nature with one another. And this was my 6th time drinking ayahuasca, and more times would come. Thank you for reading so far, enduring this most peculiar of experiences. The Infinite Light and the Beautiful Reality, a 1.5 gram mushroom trip report by I Am Aaron's Rationale, posted to earbud.org, August 23rd, 2012. There is something I've desired and feared for a long time, to throw myself into my biological ocean, and not just float, but also swim. I've used mushrooms, and I mean use in the sense that a painter uses his brush and palette to express himself, multiple times before, but never completely by myself. It has never happened like this before, and for that reason, I write. I cannot explain my motivations for this experience exactly. Lately though, I have been reading more and more about Zen Buddhism, and the release of what Alan Watts calls the ego. The immediate setting was as such. My life at the time was really creating a lot of stress, although it seemed to be on the upturn. Still though, a lot of conflicting inner dialogue was present. I'd returned to my hometown for a court date, had no money, brought nothing with me, and as a result, was utterly bored. I think the most direct motivation, however, was my introduction to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, more specifically the manual created by Timothy Leary. I knew that I could not afford much, but figured it was the best way I could think of to spend my money at the time. The day before my trip, I planned. I decided that the most comforting place to go would be my mother's bed. It has been her bed all my life, and has always been a place where I feel safe. I also decided to do it early in the morning, so I could be by myself while I peaked, since my brother would be at school and my mum at work. I went and obtained the mushrooms. They seemed very healthy. That night, I was a child again, and it was Christmas Eve. My mum woke me up at 8 AM, like I asked her to, but I did not tell her why. Based on her reaction to me telling her about my experience after it happened, this was a wise choice. I had some errands to get out of the way, and I wanted to read some more of the Book of the Dead. I also chose to eat half of the mushrooms that I got, 1.5 grams, and make tea, which is my favourite method of ingestion, with the other half. I chopped up half of the caps and stems and added them to the tea bag along with the shake. I think I used some sort of raspberry tea. I then walked up to Mother's room, turned the television off and cleared the bed. I supported myself with pillows so that I could eat the mushrooms and drink the tea without any inconvenience. Another thing that I think is noteworthy is that my dog Lola was with me the whole time. I thought about the things I'd read in the Book of the Dead and tried to make myself aware of landmarks to let me know that it had begun. I do not want to trivialise this information in the book, because I do not think this is the place, nor do I feel I can do it justice in my own words. My advice is to read it for yourself, and also to use it because it is a very powerful tool. Significant events did occur, however, that correlated with this book, so I think they are important details in my story. The first was the drone. I heard a low hum begin that reverberated like a gong. This continued throughout the entire of what I will call my ascension period. The next event was a burning at the base of my spine. Throughout my ascension period, this burning sensation flowed up my spine and into my skull. I made a point of allowing these events to happen, not to restrict them in any way. I believe this is a crucial point of focus if one wants to enjoy his or her psychedelic experience fully. Resistance and rationalization seem to only lead to fear and loathing. I started to doubt this feeling. I closed my eyes to see what would happen. In my previous experiences with psychedelics, this has always made things more interesting, but I always found it incredibly hard to keep my eyes closed. This time, however, I would not allow my ego to fight back. I closed my eyes again, and soon found myself in a fetal position in the middle of the bed with Lola right beside me. At this point, I noticed her and began to rub her belly. I will admit as well that for a fleeting moment, I felt a sexual connection to her, but it was soon recategorized in my brain as a love of deep friendship. The Book of the Dead makes a point of recognizing sexual desires as well as all others as being products of the mind. Under the guidance of the mushrooms, the boundaries between these desires seem to be temporarily washed away, but if you allow your ego to run free in your mind like the wild logical animal that it is, it will inform you of the state of the things with much more honesty than it does in its usual cage. Anyway, I digress. With my eyes closed, I began to move them around behind my lids to get them used to the feeling. My visuals remind me of what happens when you put a magnet up to a television screen. The background was black with waves of colour spectrums pulsating, flowing, ever-changing, yet constant. I was ecstatic. I was delighted. I was safe. Then, I peaked. Normally, it is impossible for me, as well as most that I know, to sleep while influenced by psychedelic substances. It's simply something that cannot be forced. This time, however, I lost myself. I went into what I would call a trance. For it was as if I was dreaming, but my entire self was there. It must be what people experience during a lucid dream. I don't personally remember much of it, but I will tell you what I can. The first thing I saw was a very bright light coming from, well, everywhere. I also remember some blues in the background after the light subsided a little, but the light was always present. I do not have any sequence of time for these events, but there are images that are quite vivid in my head. Soon, I was somewhat introduced to 2 characters of sorts. There were definitely more of them, but these are the 2 that I can remember. The first was the largest being I have ever seen. He took up my whole field of vision. He appeared to be some sort of genie, as he was bound at the wrist by gold gauntlets and possibly elsewhere on his body. He was dark-skinned and fairly old. Despite his apparent bondage, he seemed very content though. One idea I reflected on later was that he is the physical polar opposite of my pale, skinny and young appearance. The other being I almost immediately associated with my mother. It was a sort of blackbird as it was flying at a very fast rate in and out of my field of vision. The first reason I associated with my mother was that it had a sort of fiery mane down its upper back, and my mum has red hair. If I talked to them, I do not remember what we talked about. All I know is that they were both very content creatures and very comforting to me. I do vividly remember though, them waving goodbye to me as I opened my eyes and returned back to the external world. If I'm calling the first part my ascension period, then this was my descent back into reality. I suddenly realised that I'd only actually drank 1 cup of the mushroom tea, and that I intended to drink 3 of them. I do not think I needed any more than I took. What is ironic is that this was my deepest experience and yet the smallest dose I have ever taken. It was now 1 PM. I hoped that the psilocybin had not become inactive and quickly put the cup in the freezer to save for someone else. So then I get this urge to call up a couple of my friends because I really wanted to talk and to smoke some weed. My friends were intrigued by my mental state, so without any hesitation, they said they would pick me up soon. I felt like smoking a cigarette for the first time all day, so I decided to take Lola out and do just that. We went outside and I lit up. Across the street in an alley, there was a group of dogs who constantly bark. Usually I would not let Lola go over there because I was sure that she just wanted to bark back at them. But this time, I felt an urge to allow her to lead me. So around the block we went, me trying to smoke a cigarette and her desperately pulling on a leash. We soon got to the pack of dogs that were in a chain link fence. There were 2 young pit bulls and a smaller white mutt. Everyone was barking like crazy and I stood there and watched. But then, something happened. The bigger of the 2 pit bulls started attacking the mutt. It had its neck in its mouth and was pulling back and forth. I stood in awe. I couldn't move. A lady came outside and started yelling at the dogs to stop. She was terrified. I was still completely silent. She started screaming, "Help me! Help me!" over and over again. Upon hearing that, my statuesque state was completely shattered. I leapt into action. First I tied up Lola, who was still barking, so that she didn't try to intervene. I then jumped over the fence and went straight for the 2 dogs without a second thought. At this point, the lady was hysterical, probably fearing for her dog's life. She began to beat on the pit bull, pulling on the 2 of them, trying to get him to stop. I put my hands in the back of the pit bull and began talking calmly to him, stroking him gently. I kept telling the woman that she could not force this and that the pit bull had to let go on his own. Well, I think she finally heard me, because she backed off a bit, and as she did, I guided the pit back towards me with my arms, and wouldn't you know it, he let go. She quickly scooped up the wounded dog, took him straight inside, with the pit bull at her heels. After safely inside, she repeated over and over again, thank you so much." All I could find myself asking was, why? I truly believed that dog was going to kill the other if there was no intervention. What would make him do such a thing? Who has made him into such a creature? This woman? Another? Was the dog simply disturbed? These questions raced through my head as I walked out the door, back towards my house. Now, this event may seem trivial to some, but to me it was the external sister event to my mostly internal ascension period. I'd somehow brought some knowledge of myself as well as the world out of me and used it within the external world. Now, I say this because I'm highly suspect of whether or not I would have been able to have done what I did without the first part of the journey. In my usual mental state, I imagine I would have had thoughts such as, nah, this isn't my problem, or what if I get hurt? Yet these were the furthest things from my mind in the situation. In a way, I felt that it brought out the God in me, the God that exists within everything. I know that may not make sense to some, but it was how I felt and continue to feel. So, to whom it may concern, the rest of the day I spent getting stoned and just talking my ass off, telling anyone who was willing to hear about my tale. And now I have told you. This was one of the most, if not the most wonderful and intense experiences of my entire life. The All-Seeing Eye of God. A Bromo Dragonfly Trip Report by Hattie Vatiti. Posted at earbud.org, July 20th, 2016. So, I had the weirdest trip a while back. It all started that I took one dose of bromo. When it didn't work, I took another one. And when that didn't work, I took a third one. So, it didn't work. And then I had a hit from a bong. And tell you what, I was tripping very hard for an hour. So, the trip was pretty fast. In the start of the trip, there came voices. And I saw when I watched the stereos and TV lines of light going through them towards me. And it all hit me at once. First in the trip, I saw and heard that the whole existence is endless by numbers. I saw that there is endless possibilities and endless different lives. We all would be endless beings in this endless sequence of numbers. After this, I surfed a little bit around the universe. I saw different galaxies, sitting on my bench, and even black holes. When I went to a black hole, the voices started to echo and curve. I saw that the black holes had a usage. Of course, it was all metaphors, but in the trip it became clear that those places were to people who would go to damnation. Those places were to people who wouldn't be liked in the endless existence. Their souls would be sent to black holes, and that would be the end of their existence. Then, of course, my trip took me to hell. I felt hell since my cramps echoed of the things happening in the trip. It didn't feel like my body was squeezed, but it was my consciousness, my soul, that was squeezed harder and harder, so that the pain amplified more and more. Hell was a place in the trip where those people who have done bad things would go to be alone in a place where the pain just amplifies continuously. There isn't anyone else there, except for my own consciousness. Well, of course, this would also be a metaphor, but that is how hell was shown to me in the moment. After hell, of course, came heaven. In heaven, my consciousness of being squeezed changed towards the fact that I was feeling euphoric. I had tears of joy and tears of agony while I was sitting in the bench, watching the whole trip through, which didn't feel to come from my head. In the end, I saw the eye of God, the all-seeing eye of God with rays of light coming from it. It was kinda like the same thing when in the First Contact movie, Jodie Foster met the extraterrestrials, and they came as the father of the character. Well, for me, the Godhead chose to come as the all-seeing eye of God. I also was a light, a halo. Above me, I saw heaven going to the left of me, and hell to the right of me. After this, I had two flashbacks. One was when I was coming from Egypt back to Finland on an aeroplane. I heard Satan talking to me, which seemed to be something of a microcorg XL devil vocoder. It's pretty freaky. Also, I heard one day trumpets going which echoed some sort of judgment stuff. I don't know what they're supposed to be, but I understand that the whole spiritual existence is just fun and games. When I've pondered this trip, which I wrote about, well, I've also pondered all the trips which I've been through as well. All the trips kind of feel that I wasn't completely in charge of them, but they rather seem as conversations with a single source that would be the Godhead. I know, it's a pretty weird way of seeing it. And I'm even pondering, was it just this trip, which might have been a close call with the cramps and stuff to death? Or could all of my trips have been conversations with the same source? Is this the same source that we all contact in our psychedelic trips on acid, mushrooms and so on? The shamans back in the day, were they able to contact the single source which is everything, and see many things because of it? Well, I'm just pondering, what if God is psychedelics? And for some people, this might open different ways to see it, since their conversations with a one single source would be the Godhead as well. Personally, I'm all for the cosmic consciousness, and of us being interlinked to some higher stuff, even if I cannot explain why it is so right now. Also, I've pondered why so many people have awakened to the Illuminati, and to the all-seeing eye of God without them ever being aware of the fact that it might be real. I just live after the trip in a place where Godhead is everything, and everywhere, but most people will never see it. And for those who think that it might have just come from my head, well, would my head have knowledge about all sorts of stuff like that in the subconscious? Of course, someone might tell me that my subconsciousness was just playing with me, but the whole trip went through like a book that was written for me to see. I hope that people start to grasp the idea that maybe the trips are just conversations with higher beings. In my way of seeing it, well, there could be billions of different gods. There could be billions of different worlds. Hell, there could be billions of different afterlives. All of this, regardless though, would just come from one single source, and that would be God, Yahweh, Brahman, Allah, Tao, and so forth. Of course, in a sense, well, God could be the Trimurti of Hinduism, but I just rather see them as manifestations of Brahman, as the single source that it is. Namaste. Being a Fish and an Ape, a Salvia Divinorum trip report by Vicarious in Dub, posted to earbud.org October 7th, 2021. I was completely sober before. No weed, no alcohol. I didn't use any other enhancer, grapefruit juice or likewise. I've weighed out 6 grams of dried leaves. I've rehydrated them for like 5 minutes in lukewarm water, as well as firmly squeezing them out, dividing them into 6 equalish portions, and then sitting down, removing the central vein from the leaves while listening to a lecture by Terence McKenna to lighten me up for this experience. As soon as I finished this process with the first portion, I started chewing it. I really chewed it all down, proper grinding it between my teeth so there's just a very thick juice in my mouth, and went on removing the veins from the rest of my leaves. Once I felt like I properly chewed it all down, maybe for like 10 minutes, I spit it out and started chewing the next ball of 1 gram. From the second portion on, I flavoured it with some honey. Could have done it from the beginning, but it was just after chewing the first portion that I realised I'm going to have to get 5 more down, and let me tell you, it's not the best taste in the world. While chewing the third portion, I started feeling something very subtle. I smoked and vaporised salvia many times before, so it definitely felt vaguely familiar in some sense. After spitting out the fourth and putting in the fifth portion, I turned out the lights, put on some shamanic music and sat on my couch, chewing with my eyes closed the whole time. I started to feel as if my 2 cerebral hemispheres were trying to separate from each other, amounting to the typical zipper feeling. It's like being zipped open in the middle. Every now and then I had an intrusive thought like, "Oh, what are you doing? Getting high? Why are you doing this? What if someone rings the doorbell? Aren't the people you should text back or something like that? Do you have any idea how stupid you're probably looking in this moment?" And I realised this was the ego, conditioned by culture, trying to anchor my consciousness to its lower dimension, and there was no need to really worry. So I made an effort to let go, shortly before realising that effort in itself is weighing me down, and the only thing I need to do in order to let go is, well, let go. Supported by this thought, I got up, spit out the 5th portion and took in the 6th. I sat back down, started chewing, and fully let go. My mind started wandering, but I still feel like I couldn't just let it go entirely, because I still had something in my mouth. So I just kinda got into the groove while chewing the last bit of salvia. After a few minutes, I felt like this was going to be enough for today's session. I got up, spit it out, went for a quick pee, keeping the light switched off, and then went to lie down on my couch. I started feeling like there was some sort of entity present. Not in the room per se, but in my mind, some external consciousness, and I welcomed it as the consciousness of the plant communicating with my own consciousness through the psychoactive compound. I concentrated on sending a message, something like, "Hello, I welcome you. I'd like to communicate. Feel free to take hold and show me what you have to show me." And suddenly I felt like some sort of download starting. I could feel my head starting to fill up with a feeling, slowly descending like a download bar filling up, but the bar itself was my body, and it was being filled by something. I felt it slowly making its way towards my neck, my chest, my lap, my legs, and my feet, and as soon as it reached my toes, I realised how it felt like. It was water. It felt like I slowly got lowered headfirst into water, and as soon as I realised this, I saw an underwater world, and I realised I was turned into a fish. I let my newly transformed consciousness just drift along the current, swimming and turning for a little while. I could still feel consensus reality having a hold on me. I could feel the couch under my body, but it felt like I was in 2 dimensions at the same time. An ape on a couch, and a fish underwater. This only went on for a few minutes though. Then I felt like I was being brought back into my body by the plant consciousness very gently. Kinda like it took me in and then I could feel its presence. Well, her presence, because it really felt like a feminine entity somehow, maybe this is just my cultural programming though, was lying down on the top of my body, weighing me down, but in a very warm and nice way. From that point on, I just kinda drifted around a bit. It was like I was starting to see circular movements behind my closed eyes. I realised, oh wow, is this the wheel? And indeed, more circular lines started forming, and some sort of round mandala emerged. It wasn't colourful, more like the dark outlines in front of a slightly lighter background, but it was beautiful nevertheless. After watching this spin out for a while, I had a feeling of ascending, like I was really leaving my body this time, only not as a fish, but as mind by itself. I ascended for a bit, but then I started thinking, what if someone rings the bell now and you're in a phase of ego dissolution? And at first I was a bit annoyed at that thought, but then I realised it's actually okay. I had some trouble with my downstairs neighbours being very sensitive to any noise lately. She moved out just a week ago, so there's no need to worry about it, but it was still imprinted in my mind. So I probably need some time to be completely at ease again, and I thought that it's absolutely okay that there's this one anchor still tying me down for now. This won't be my last session, and there is no rush to get anywhere at all. So I just floated there a bit, most of my mind floating in a very calm and relaxed state. One little bit of my mind still with my body on the couch, and after a few more minutes, I consciously made it back to my body completely, slowly starting to move my fingers and toes, hands and feet, and eventually I just got up. I breathed for a few minutes, turned on the lights, and ended the session. I think the most intensive part lasted for about 45 minutes to an hour. This was so different from any other salvia experience so far, smoked or vaped, far more relaxed. I felt like I really had time to interact with the plant consciousness and see where it wanted to take me. I'm very curious to see how much further she can take me once I get over the slight neighbour-induced anxiety and feel like slightly increasing the dose. Anyways, the shepherdess is a gentle spirit, when you don't torture for sure. Christ, Heal Thyself. A 5-MeO-DIPT, mushrooms and cannabis trip report by Way. Posted at earbud.org December 5th, 2002. Friday, November 29th, 2002. 11. Set the day after Thanksgiving. I fasted on Thanksgiving in remembrance of all the millions of beings slaughtered by an uncaring populace just for this day. I've been thinking about what it means to be thankful and how all the different facets of my life, like anarchism, veganism and psychedelics, are all interconnected. I'm taking the Foxy and Shroom combination in hopes of a more holistic mind and body trip. I find the Foxy very recreational and body-centred. I'm hoping this will be augmented with the mental and entheogenic effects of the mushrooms. R is with me and is taking just the Foxy, since it's a new combination for us. I've been sick with bronchitis and an infected nipple for a while now, and I just hope I can effect some shamanistic healing upon myself. At this time, I'm taking daily multivitamins, B12 supplements, I'm vegetarian, yohimbe extract, ginkgo biloba, and depakote, valproic acid. Setting. I thought of trying this combination about a week and a half before I actually got the chance, and was quite excited about its possibilities. We are tripping at R's house, our usual indoor trip pad. Unfortunately, it's a bit cold to go camping. It was a mild, if a bit brisk, overcast fall day. Report. To start off and get into a nice relaxed mood, we smoked a couple of bowls of cannabis. Then, we each took our Foxy. I had my 5 gel cubes and I had a veggie cap he'd filled with an eyeballed, yes, we know, irresponsible, amount. He then went to take a bath so he'd feel nice and clean for the trip to come. I was planning on waiting until I felt an alert from the Foxy before I took the mushrooms, but I decided I didn't care if they came on first. and so took them soon after R left to take a bath. I smoked some more cannabis while I was all alone by myself as well. T plus 30 minutes. By the time R came back to the room, I was already starting to trip from the mushrooms. Around this time, my memory gets a little fuzzy for a bit. I remember we were on the bed talking. I remember having some strange visual disturbances during this time if I misfocused my eyes. The light walls would turn dark and other effects would ensue. They remind me most of when I let my eyes misfocus while looking at the mirror, or the visuals I got from Syrian Rue, mostly black and white, dealing with contrast. I remember R's face looking like my stepsister's face. R wasn't at the level he wanted to be at, so I got him the last 3 gel cubes of Foxy, approximately 12 milligrams, as a booster. I remember being really drowsy and confused, i.e. just getting to the peak. I remember missing my girlfriend. I remember having weird thoughts and not being able to interact with R. When he held my hand with his, I felt really weird, and the mushrooms told me it was time to go, be by myself, as they often do. T plus 45 minutes. So here's when I leave to go get in the spa. I found some towels and undertook the task of preparing the spa. It was slightly difficult, as I was already tripping, but I managed it fairly well in the end. I had to turn up the temperature because I'd forgotten to the night before. It was only at 97 degrees Fahrenheit, and I like it up at 104 degrees. I got in anyways. It was still much warmer than the outside, even if not as blistering as I usually like it. As I was in there, it got warmer and warmer. By the time I got out, it was up to 103 degrees. When I first got in, I was just thinking about getting warmer, as tryptamines often make me feel cold. I was also trying to not get my long hair wet, as I just washed it the day before and it was all nice. However, as soon as I was tripping so hard, I just couldn't help myself. I wanted in so bad and had to totally immerse myself. I did 1 round of hypoxia in the spa, but then I thought better of it. Even though I've done it before on mushrooms with no problems, I still recognised the potential danger of what I was doing. Being on a new set of drugs, I felt it most prudent to not hold my breath floating face down in a huge tub of water, on the off chance I actually do hold my breath until I pass out or have some other untimely accident. This was my first rebirth, my first waking up. T plus unknown hours. Soon, time became completely irrelevant, so no more times will be listed from here on out. I did some yogic postures in the water, which felt wonderful. And while doing some of these, I felt the urge to start singing a power song, but I couldn't let go of my ordinary reality hung up about singing. I tried to hum a tune, but my ego wouldn't let any words out. I felt silly. Somehow, the idea to start chanting Om bubbled up in my head. I've done this before on my first solitary trip, but that wasn't for very long. This time, I chanted Om for a very, very long time. I was out there in the spa by myself for quite a few hours. I don't have an idea how long, at least several hours since I was watching movies during this time. Almost the whole time from when I began chanting to when I went back inside, I was chanting Om. The repetition of this sacred syllable I think definitely helped foster the ecstatic state which ensued. Each repetition became a rebirth in itself. Even though I only said 1 word the whole time I was chanting, that 1 word meant everything. It was not just empty repetition. Each sound was filled as a prayer, as thanksgiving, as awe, as understanding, as humility, as... well, you get the idea. Each time I said Om, it would reverberate in my mind and release a thought. Om shows infinity. Everything is contained in it. Everything connected to the primal vibration. Everything is self-similar, flowing from the beginning out to the end, flowering into ever more complex forms. The myriad thoughts that Om released were on all different kinds of matters, but the connections between all these disparate matters were readily evident. At some point, I woke up transfigured into a very interesting Christ. I was unbearded, taller and lanky, with long, thin, straight black hair. I realised that in Christ's time, some demons were actually infections and other diseases that they did not have the medical technology to treat. Exorcism was actually a form of shamanic healing. Consider casting out demons against, say, the Hivaro practice of sucking out evil spirits. I made the water holy, and so it was made into a healing bath. I coughed up much mucus from my lungs. I would spit these intrusive energies out, removing their power from our body. And I was still chanting for all of this. I spat out a lot of mucus that day. I was in the spa a long time, but would occasionally get out for a few minutes to cool off. The water was getting hot, and I was becoming very pruned. But I persisted in staying in the spa, knowing that I was healing through the divine power, as well as the power of the hot water and myself. Actually, all one power. When looking at my pruned hands, I found them extremely beautiful with exquisite patterns, but also sad. They represented the suffering I needed to endure as part of this healing process. My body soaked in the purifying waters for what was an unknowable amount of time. But at some point, I transfigured again. This time, it was into an alien alter ego of myself. I think I shall call him Fandar. It was interesting because as I woke up to being Fandar, I found myself with much to explore about him and his alien world. My body was much more plump than my ordinary body, with light green skin, no hair, I think, and pointy ears. He had the same piercings as me. He was from the alien suburbs. His house had cool patterns on it, and the trees looked like mushrooms. They were without leaves, but the branches grouped together, forming rounded mushroom head-like structures. There was so much vegetation, so much life to take in, it was honestly quite overwhelming. Every blade of grass screamed for attention. The ivy looked fatter and different somehow, kind of like how I was different. There was some plant too that put out little globular structures. These all seemed very alien to me. I was having lots of auditory hallucinations during this time as well. I heard lots of sounds echoing, as well as distorted and phantom sounds. Fandar knew that he was Christ as well, and continued the exorcism. Every time he would expel some power, the neighbours' dogs would bark, and he delighted in this. He had quite a mischievous personality overall. He also liked to fiddle with his body and was decidedly bisexual. He would pull on his penis to stretch it out, or reach between his legs and play with his butthole. I should note that R's shirt that day had an alien smoking a J sitting cross-legged on an amanita. This may have helped program me for this transfiguration. It was a grey entity, however, so maybe not. Who knows? After R had finished watching Chasing Amy, he came out to check on me since I'd been alone so very long. When he came out, I was still chanting. At first he looked at me oddly, but I just continued unabated. He quickly realised I was just in my tripping groove, and we exchanged some wordless communication. He had just come out to make sure I was okay, and having accomplished this, he returned to go watch Spider-Man. I went back to my purgatory, my time of suffering, to cast out the demons. The brick walkway coming up to the spa had these wonderful patterns in it, as did all the mucus I had spit up onto it. At some point, I felt I was done in the spa, and I got out, picked up a towel and put it on. I went back inside to R's room and dried off. I got him some water and took out the laptop. I went and tried to write, even though I was still in the middle of the come down. It was very hard to try and convey the experience into words, as it always is. I was trying to do it in that moment so I could get the flavour of the experience and try to bring it across to ordinary reality. But typing was so very hard. It was so much slower than I was thinking. This was extremely frustrating, and I soon gave up. I really need to remember to have a tape recorder ready when I take the mushrooms. But anyway, here is what I wrote, unedited. Begin. Christ, heal thyself. Om. Patience. Om. It comes. Om. Forever. Om. Healing. Om. Life. Om. Vibration. Om. Everything. Om. Love. Om. Thankfulness. I can start. I can try. I try to begin. In the beginning. Word. Logos. Christ. Christ once again. Forevermore. Evermore beautiful. Thank you. Prayer. Healing. Life. Seed. Everything. Forever. Existing. Peace. Serving. Jid. It's all one. We are all one. Waking up. Being born again. Language. Seeing language. Being language. Patience. End. I'd wanted to write something beautiful. A poem that would convey the state and show all the disparate groups I communicate with and how they interconnected with each other and each other's struggles. That all of our social justice issues are related, and fixing one means fixing all of them. We all need to work together for the revolutionary social change required to bring about a more just and ethical world. Unfortunately, I just couldn't get it out like I wanted to, and so here I am, telling my story instead. We spent the rest of the trip basically just hanging out and smoking some herb. In summary, this is one of the most powerful and enjoyable and theogenic experiences I've ever had. I feel this combination seriously warrants further exploration. Before I took this trip, I was wondering if 5-MeO-DIPT was a mild MAOI. It felt like I had read that somewhere, but couldn't find exactly where. From my experience, I feel like maybe that is the case, because I felt like I'd taken more mushrooms than I thought I had. Admittedly, I didn't weigh them, I just eyeballed them, but it still felt like a much more powerful trip than that amount of shrooms should have given me in the first place. However, maybe there is no MAOI effect at all, and it's just a really good synergy between them. Maybe it was due to the MAOI effect of the yohimbe I recently started taking. I haven't tried the mushroom since then until now. I will definitely be trying this combo again in the near future though. Up until this trip, I haven't felt like a shaman, just a shaman in training. Now, I feel like I am a shaman, even if a fairly inexperienced one. I feel like I'm still just beginning, but I have enough power now to start working on healing myself for real. The infection that was in my nipple is now gone. The bronchitis was unnoticeable for a few hours, until I spent an hour walking home from the movies in the cold that night. But even after that, it's still better than it was. Overall, I'm quite pleased with the shamanic practice I got into on this trip. I include the chanting and body postures in this category. Flowing Through the Veins of God, a 5-gram mushroom trip report by a free lunch, taken from the Vivec Discord. My girlfriend and I live in an old jackrabbit cabin in the Mojave Desert. At the time, we had the place to ourselves and free of obligations for a couple days, so we decided to take psilocybin mushrooms together and watch the sunset. Our respective doses were each about 5 grams and we ate them simultaneously. We weren't expecting anything unusual, but were hoping for a spectacular sunset, as they often are out here in the middle of nowhere. I was primarily hoping to get a better look at the glistening strings which connect all the stars together, something I have always seen in the sky when I use psilocybin at night. I have a long-standing relationship with psilocybin mushrooms, which has never once been negative or upsetting, and I typically microdose, as I find it greatly improves my energy, mood, and ability to focus. I was not microdosing at any recent time before this experience, however. The mushrooms are of the Burma variety, grown and dubbed Myanmar Lightning by a dear friend who I learned much about amateur mycology with when we were roommates in another place and time. In my personal opinion, the effects of this very well-loved specimen are not quite like others I've tried before, but they definitely still fall within the realm of common mushroom trips for the most part. Maybe the passion with which he works feeds them in a way unknown to science. And after this experience, I wouldn't doubt it. Once the effects of the psilocybin had taken hold, and after rounding up some homemade herbal tea and blankets, we climbed to an elevated platform which stands about 12 feet high out behind the cabin. As our cabin is built near the crest of a hill, this observation deck, which we refer to as Star Porch, offers a 360-degree view of the desert around us, and a full, unobstructed view of the night sky. We sat together and sipped the violet-coloured tea my girlfriend made. It contained many flowers, was not caffeinated, and if she can remember the recipe, I will include it as a footnote. The flavour, and especially the aroma, had a strong and pleasant effect, which I could feel throughout my whole body. Simply smelling the tea produced painterly waves of fractals before my eyes. As the sky darkened fully, my partner expressed her desire to quit smoking cigarettes. She explained that she wanted to be free from the grip of addiction to them, and how she wanted to keep a relationship with smoking in the way one keeps a relationship with an old lover, an occasional visit, an occasional reconnection. I told her she had my full support. Her desire to be free was almost tangible to me, and her analogy was beautiful and vivid in my mind. I could feel and see the force of life and will around her, like a warm light radiating from her center. She sat in silence while I admired her, and I began to feel something else. It was a sense of longing, or perhaps a sense of duty, but not one that I felt, one that she felt. I could tell that she longed to nurture the young. I could see that she wanted a child. I considered the indecision and traumatic past surrounding my own fatherhood, and felt deeply sad that I didn't yet share in her yearning. As I looked on, I saw her in a way that was surreal and yet true. She took the form of a ruby purple-coloured daffodil, glowing against the dark sky. Her head was a full and beautiful bloom, craning over and looking downward as daffodil blooms tend to do. Before her on the deck of the porch, little daffodils were huddled together. Their blooming heads beamed up to her while she hung over them, as if she were singing a song or teaching a lesson which held them rapt with attention. I began to cry for the beauty of what I saw, and I moved to hold her close to me. At this point, my self-image was that of a brilliant blue-winged humanoid creature, emanating a strong light and power of my own, and she took a similar winged form to mine, still glowing with the ethereal purple light and warm radiance as before. It felt as though we had just landed on our perch there, and were looking out over the horizons around us, divining where next to fly. We laid down in our nest of blankets and held each other close. By now, my lover was also crying. I could feel our tears combining as our faces pressed together, while the light and beauty that shone out from each of us warmed me under the cold night sky. Suddenly, unexpectedly, in a way that two rain droplets may become one in a lucky breeze, our separate consciousnesses combined, and we became formless together. I was unbothered, even gleeful that this was happening, and it seemed that she was too. We identified and greeted each other wordlessly in this bright place, and we communicated ideas without speaking. It wasn't much like speaking at all, in fact, or at least it wasn't like speaking English. It was the most directly I've ever communicated with anyone. It was first like knowing for myself, and then like knowing that she knew too. The revelation here felt less about what we communicated, which was mostly messages of love and happiness for each other, and more in the manipulation of whatever dimensional fabric allowed this mode of communicating. It was an enrapturing, timeless, and exuberantly joyful experience. As is often the case during my mushroom trips these days, what I actually heard in my ears throughout the experience was primarily my material world tinnitus. Typically with psilocybin, it grows from its usual background ring into a chorus of high tones which hold a lifting note, almost like 1,000 voices which never want for breath, but are always on the brink of running out of it. I feel it is not always present in my trips, but it's never unwelcome when it is. The physical sensation was that of being immersed in a warm and flowing, even bubbling liquid light, almost as though each of us was suspended in a solution of the other. What I saw once we had settled into being in our new dimension added immense depth to what I felt, and I can best describe it as beautiful, grotesque, and humbling. It was like a H.R. Giger painting, but warm, colourful, happy, loving, and encouraging. I saw the whole of connected consciousness extending outward from our place in it, like a galaxy of stars on a vibrant widow's web, rippling and undulating in all directions to infinite reaches and topographies. We flowed together, like fluorescent, multicoloured blood through channels and veins, through parts of a body the likes of which I had never before seen, but somehow I observed with an easy acceptance, as though it was very obviously just the way things are. What I saw, in my own belief, was God, and our place within it at that time. Those here familiar with God may draw their own conclusions as to what form it truly takes. The image I experienced is still hanging in my mind's eye, which I cannot describe further with words. When we returned to our separate selves, after an unrecorded and unremembered amount of time in that plane of existence, We sat together, searching for ways to put it into words. As we compared what each of us had just experienced, we realised it all matched, from the sensations to the visuals to the unspoken communication. The fact that I was able to see from an elevated perspective while merged with another person who can corroborate what happened constantly blows my mind. A psychic connection? A soul bond? Whatever it was, we both felt it was a glimpse into a greater truth beyond our perceived world. Coming from an early childhood of Sunday schools and youth groups, to eventually becoming a high school atheist, I've long since my mid-20s worked to develop a personal spirituality that is divorced from religion, and to find faith which lacks dogma, while still informing my sense of morality. It is through this experience that my years of seeking felt deeply rewarded, and at the time of writing, I still think about this daily. This peek behind the veil was moving for both me and my partner. Unlike any vivid dream I've had, which tend to fade quickly if I don't write them down soon enough, this happened months ago, and this is the first time I'm putting it into writing. It was so real, I couldn't forget a single aspect of it. We decided the same night that though we wish to experience more of what we saw, we understand it may never come to us again, and we have to yet try to replicate the experience in any way we can. If it ever happens again, I will write of that here as well. I hope this report is somehow meaningful to others who are seeking. Psychedelics, even when taken unceremoniously, can change your life in the attitudes you take toward it. They can reveal and amplify what's inside of you and what's all around you, even if you don't always see it yourself. Respect them and ingest them with love and care. Thanks for reading. So, he actually left the ingredients for the tea. Oh my god, I'm going to butcher so many of these. Well, just one. Calendula, violet, rose petal, rose hip, hibiscus, chamomile and honey. I'll feature them on the screen if you're watching. Now, what's interesting about this report is that we actually have a second one here, and this is covering his girlfriend's experience, so I'm just going to jump straight into that. It's a really nice addendum to the report. About an hour before sunset on October 18th, we took a large handful of mushrooms each. We'd both taken this particular batch, lovingly grown by a dear friend of my co-pilot, several times prior with consistently uplifting results, at a range of doses from single caps weighing less than 0.5 Gs to small handfuls weighing between 3 to 4. These are estimates, as I typically judge mushroom dosing based on intuition and their feel, occasionally documenting with a photo rather than reliably measuring on a scale. On this occasion, we decided to take more, and I believe we took around 5 grams each. In my experience, a hallucinogenic dose of psilocybes results in a series of predictable physiological effects as the material begins to metabolize, in this case after about 15 minutes. It starts with a mild nausea that is resolved by laying down supine and closing my eyes. There is a subtle physical sensation of blood rushing to my head, or my brain seeming to feel warm. Sometimes this is accompanied by chills, and it's very important for me to head that off because if I continue to feel cold, that can result in the nagging sensation of wetness anywhere my body is feeling chilly. Luckily, we live in the Mojave Desert, and mid-October the highs were still in the 90s and the lows barely dropping below 70. So, as I lay down in my warm kitchen on the dinette bench, I felt a wave of strong drowsiness wash over me and waited patiently for the side effects of the come-up to subside. This stupor, however, was much more pronounced and long-lasting than those I experienced previously. When my partner checked on me after 15 minutes of laying there, I remember explaining that I felt sleepy and nauseous. I wasn't really uncomfortable, because I understood that I had taken a higher dose than I'd possibly ever done in the last 15 years of using it, and I was accepting of the temporary state. Another 15 to 20 minutes went by, the sunlight was now disappearing, and I got up to urinate and immediately felt so drowsy it verged on dizziness. I remember telling my partner I felt weak as I left the bathroom. We'd taken this dose with the house to ourselves intentionally to have an evening of laughter, cuddling and stargazing while our roommates were away. 2 months prior we'd started living together, and our relationship was blossoming into a more serious commitment. Both of us had looked forward to having an opportunity to share quality time together while our roommates were absent. As he caringly inquired into my status, I became aware that I wanted to proactively shake my side effects, and something struck me that I needed to make a tea. I set a pot of water to boil and pulled every dried flower out of my herb drawer. Calendula, chamomile, rose petal, rosehip, violet and hibiscus. In that moment, I noted a lack of thought process and the feeling that I was operating on pure instinct, not recognizing until the flowers hit the pot why my subconscious had motivated me to prepare the elixir in the first place. The second I smelt the terpene-laden vapours, I immediately felt more clear-headed, and the persistent nausea vanished. The liquid was a gorgeous violet colour, and felt excited that I had done some kind of kitchen witchery in an altered state. I'd made a love potion for myself and my partner to enjoy for our romantic evening, simultaneously addressing the symptoms of onset, because I was ready for them to be over by now. Since I was feeling so much better, I gathered up a few items to take up to our star porch, a climbable shade structure in our backyard with a deck about 12 feet off the ground. We were accompanied by comfy pads, pillows, blankets, the pot of flower potion sweetened with honey, as well as water, seltzers and a speaker. We climbed up and for the next several hours we remained up there, literally pissing off the side of the thing rather than leave the stars in each other's company. As we settled in, I don't remember the details of our conversation, but I do remember a lot of laughter, swells of euphoria and gratitude for my home, my lover, his dog, my cat, the desert around me and everything it has provided since moving there a year and a half prior. After an unknown amount of time, counting blessings, probably somewhere around an hour, I began to speak about my unhealthy dependence on cigarettes, and as I spoke, I realised how much I would like to embark on cessation efforts. This was the first time I ever brought up this insecurity with my partner, and as we sat together under the starry sky, I started to feel an omnidirectional expansion of my soul, a feeling of letting down a wall that had been overgrown in my mind to the extent that I forgot it was there. A state of pure emotional vulnerability in the safest possible place, in the arms of a person who was equally open to cradling my heart as it poured out my mouth. He heard my description of my desired freedom from addiction, and held me tighter and enthusiastically agreed that he wanted me to experience release from the chains of my toxic relationship with tobacco. As he grasped me, it seemed like I could feel every muscle fibre, every pump within a blood vessel, every electrical charge in his nervous system. "You are such a beautiful person," he gasped, overcome as tears streamed down his face. I thanked him, eyes closed, and over the next few seconds the sensory inputs of the material world were steamrolled by an all-encompassing spirit realm visualization. Spectacularly coloured undulating patterns that resembled fiddleheads and octopus tentacles unfurling. I was physically held tight into the chest of my partner, but that was secondary to the experience of being encased in an egg-shaped pink, white, golden yellow orb of safety and love. It was while in the egg that I knew for certain that he and I were fully communicating telepathically, and that he was having an equally immersive experience connecting directly to the soul. We both continued to hold each other close and allow this moment of transcendence to play out as long as it possibly could, both of us occasionally muttering something like, "Wow," and gently crying with wonder. In the egg, I started to transmit psychic messages to other loved ones. We were situated in a dimension that made it impossible to account for the amount of time in the standard reality. Our mutual journey to the spirit realm slowly eroded, and I realised I was back in my body. We started to speak to each other out loud again, and even though I was certain that he was having the same experience as I was while we were having it, I was relieved and super excited when I started asking him about what he was seeing and telling him what I was seeing, and it really was as it felt in the moment. We had successfully soul melded. This was the peak effect of the mushrooms, but the trip was far from over. We continued to decompress, laugh, came down from the star porch to snuggle the dog and the cat, and finally lay down in bed, falling asleep as the sunlight returned. This was the most life-affirming experience I've ever had with another person, and the most potent out-of-body experience I have ever had, period. It's one of those situations that as much as I'd like to verbalise every detail, I feel like the language of love is poorly translated into English. Day of Introspection, a 2CP and ketamine trip report by Particle 16, posted to earwid.org, May 7th, 2009. I spent a lot of the last week reading experience reports, as well as Shulgin's brief notes regarding 2CP. The reports were varied, and for the most part every bad report I read screamed of people without proper planning, set or setting. This sounded like serious stuff, so it deserved some respect and planning. So we decided to get up in the morning and spend 16 hours on this strange psychedelic after being well rested, and not disrupt the sleeping patterns of our holidays too much. This 2CP I picked up about 4 years ago or so was a side note to a lot of 2CI that I got at the time. The 2CI was pretty hit and miss, a few times being barely noticeable, and one time quite strong. So we had a few caps of 6mg and 10mg, and considering the age I decided we might as well try with 10. I weigh about 85 kilograms and am a vegan. In the past we've tried a variety of acid tabs, MDMA, baby woodrose seeds, DMT, salvia, several types of mushrooms and a large amount of ketamine, as far as psychedelic substance experience goes. At 10:15 AM, 10mg of 2CP taken in a gel cap with water. Nothing had been eaten since the day before other than a single piece of toast with some nutty spread. 11:18 AM. Something is slowly happening. My back is sore like another report I read, but this could be from the fact that I've spent the last hour running up and down the stairs in the process of setting up our environment, and I'm sitting weirdly towards the PC as the audio cable is a little short to the amp. I generally have pretty bad posture, I think. I feel like the onset of MDMA, but in the very early stages. My cheeks are tingling a little bit, and listening to trippy music on large speakers is a dash trippier than usual. I assume this is anxiety. 11:27 AM. Time to watch something, as I'm restless, energetic. 11:44 AM. Feeling a little giddy, a tiny bit confused and flustered. This could all be anxiety though, with a little bit of jaw clenching and the temperature getting a bit colder as well. Guess we should start feeling things soon. 12:03 PM. Going to the toilet a bit to urinate, probably anxiety again. I'm drinking quite a bit of liquid too. I think I'm seeing tiny traces and shadows occasionally. My stomach is a bit bloated. There's a slight euphoria and giddiness. At this stage I notice a trail of ants going to the dishwasher. For the next hour I swept up ants occasionally and threw them out the back. I think I imagine the amount of ants occasionally though, and as I often do on acid, I get a bit hung up about mess in our very clean place and resist the urge to tidy up. 12:25 PM. There are some fairly strong onset moments. A bit of discomfort, but once I focus on relaxing, getting over those things, they disappear and a light euphoria returns. Throughout the last hour, I felt a little cold, and it's bothered me more than it should. 1:25 PM, things are a little intense by now. Trying to watch a movie till the end, but emotions and feelings seem to be intertwined. I think visuals and the like will hit when I let go. Just getting over the discomfort for a bit. 1:49. Pretty overwhelmed now. Visuals and swirling hitting hard. Discomfort comes in waves and is mainly due to the intensity. I notice stronger colourings in peripheral vision and movement in shadows. A slight trembling like on acid. 2:09 PM. Had to deal with the cat being sketchy. I'm so overwhelmed at this stage, I feel like giggling a lot. 3:18 PM. I'm totally gone now. Very strong swirling visuals and colours are present and typing is very hard. 5:17 PM. Still powerful visuals. Time for some music, I think. The music was rather intense. I think we missed a few hours of this at its major peak by trying to focus on a funny series. That was a lot of fun, but it can tire you out fairly quickly, especially with an overload of the senses going on. Time seems to have gone rather quickly as well. The visuals during the music were a bit more abstract, plastic and futuristic as compared to the more organic fractals I've felt on acid before. 6:01 PM. Put some food on to heat, and now I put the TV on. Let me say, Bold and the Beautiful is a dodgy show in this situation, but we're having trouble deciding what we want to watch in terms of entertainment. 6:48 PM. Getting tired, still a strong long vibe and colourings. 8:12 PM, and we just noticed in the last half hour that things are starting to wind down a little. having eaten some steamed Asian buns and some fresh Turkish bread with oil. Watched an episode of Jamie at home and craved for some fantastic pumpkin soup. Real craving for tasty food going on right now. E just got a phone call from her mum. It wasn't exactly good news either, but she's holding together fine. So she's had to snap back hard into having it together, and she's had a couple of Panadine too for a mild headache she was getting, and an immunisation injection she had in the morning that has left her arm sore and a little bruised. I made some realizations during the music regarding negativity in my life at work. I feel like I'm going to have a fresh approach on it for the new year. Still considering some ketamine way later. We'll see how that goes. I'm not considering cannabis though. Normally I'd love it to relax and lose some of the edge, but I know that with acid and 2CI it brings the intensity back, and I don't want that either. 11 PM, just passing the 12-hour mark, and there are still colourings, a bit of a fuzzy and confused head, but that's mixing in with the tiredness now. At 1 AM or so, it's time to prepare the ketamine. I crush up 300mg finally and set up my MP3 player and environment. E is a bit too tired for it, and I'm somewhat prepared for this to be very intense, which I know she's not really into, and she's worried about not being able to sleep, as I'm about to find out. I cut the ketamine up into 3 lines and snort the first one. I can barely feel it even going in, which is surprising. So, I clean up the last 2 lines, and after about 2 to 3 minutes snort the last 2 lines as well, distributing them between the nostrils. I go and lie down on the bed. E tucks me in, and I put on some music. From what I remember, I didn't feel the K on set at all, and never tasted it either. From what I remember 2 days later, the trip was beyond intense. Probably the most intense I've ever had, including combining ketamine with 2CI, acid and mushrooms on separate occasions. It's hard to remember sequence, but I do remember bits while being totally knocked out. There is a portion of chamber movement I usually feel on K. These chambers usually involve people that are dear to me, and probably the portions of the mind that store my memories and understanding of them. I feel their essence or spirit. This time it was extremely vivid and in a similar fashion to Neo in the first Matrix breaking out of the harvesting growing chamber he was in. In that moment, I felt like I broke out from the constraint on rails that my ketamine trip usually has, and despite how chaotic it was, I felt a large amount of control throughout the whole journey. I felt interaction with a few beings as well. Not sure who they were exactly, but one of them was definitely a black rapper, while the other was wearing a spacesuit. It's surprising because hardly ever do I actually feel real people on Ket, and rarely are they ever full visual and personal experiences. I'm not sure what they taught me, but it felt like a debrief to a mission. I remember feeling like I was very high up, and looked straight across and saw large high-rise apartment buildings. I saw every person in those buildings, and understood that each of these was a single organism with just a slight difference between them. I make a realization about each human being and its wants and needs being a collective combination of the instincts within each cell and atom within them. Therefore, one person longing for their girlfriend is really just a combination of their cells and their survival instinct, and everything really just being a refined combination of the needs hierarchy. I remember something about Gaia and humanity's abuse of the Earth. Wonder why people don't embrace this planet a bit more. And I'm reminded of video games where the likes of the Protoss feel a nationalistic honour for their home planet. I wonder if humanity could ever embrace this in the same way. I'm a bit of a passionate greenie, so that's an issue dear to my heart. 2 AM. I've snapped out of the K-trip for the most part, and had a moment to remember who I was. At this stage, my brain starts to selectively choose which of the senses it wants to use. For instance, I can feel E's presence in the bed. I can hear our oscillating fan, which is making a harrowing reverb. I can feel the texture of the bed, but my visuals are some sort of dark neon Egyptian theme of exactly the same room I'm in. Then, it'll change and be a beach. Then it'll change and be some sort of futuristic lounge. At times, I feel like I'm outdoors looking up at a canopy of foliage. The oscillation of the fan has a metallic tingle, and my brain interprets 50s American music coming out of an AM radio in a diner. There's a few moments where I lose total knowledge of self. This usually only happens during the ketamine stage from above, after hitting the K-hole. This time I seem to cycle through a few identities, and I'm convinced that I'm speaking according to E. I didn't speak, but had some strange staggered breathing and swallowing. I feel like my body is just a vessel and a giant pool of spiritual identities, to be honest, and it's trying to influence it and possibly take it over, although it's not as scary as it sounds at the time. Think about the idea of getting a human being into this 2C and ketamine state, keeping them suspended in it for nefarious scientific purposes. The potential of the visuals I'm able to generate, just incredible. I see the first atom attracting to another at the dawn of time, and through the cause and effect, see whole galaxies being formed as I fly through them. This extends into all of evolution, through the interaction of organisms and their survival instincts and genetics. I wonder if combined with some sort of telepathy or psychic enhancement, the brain could be used as an intense supercomputer of calculation and simulation. But how could you focus such a beast? Even further, I wonder about manifestation of matter and what could be created if such a psychic enhancer was created. These are the kinds of fairly lucid and structured, yet chaotic and impossible thoughts going through my head right now. 3:50 AM. It's impossible to switch my brain off. It's been running at 10 times the usual speed, and I swear, it's been putting together some amazing graphics and visualizations during this whole time. At this stage, I start to use a meditation technique to selectively focus on less and less things, but my brain is ingenious at trying to keep itself going. I start to think that acid and the like awakens primal vibrations within each cell of the body, and these cells, maybe through their memory of Gaia, are trying to communicate with me directly. But then who really am I? A collective combination of their essence and consciousness? Or could it be that I'm a spirit that attaches to this vessel on its life journey? There's moments when the visualizations are plain evil and menacing, but I'm strong enough to steer them into a positive path. Wonder if a human brain was grown in a lab, where would its consciousness come from? If it was implanted into some other organic creation or otherwise, would it adopt the consciousness of its cells? A lot of my trips centered around these themes, and the wealth of knowledge I felt I had tapped into was purely immense. At this stage I have a Panadine, as the headache I could slightly feel a few hours ago is now coming in slow waves. I don't want it to get any worse, and hope that the combination of paracetamol and codeine might help me sleep. E has been sleeping on and off. I assume she goes into a slow trip and occasionally wakes from it, moves a bit and goes back, sort of like coming down off acid and trying to sleep. It's now 4:30 AM, and I wonder if I'll sleep at all, but my meditative tripping control seems to be working occasionally, and I managed to get myself to a state where I'm pretty sure I can hear myself snoring. I've given up control of my body, and have isolated the last excited part of the brain. 10 AM. I must have slept right after about 4:30 AM. For the rest of the day, I feel really good, if just a little tired, and we have an early night. I smoked some cannabis a few times, but unlike smoking after acid, mushrooms or MDMA, there is no further intensity or comeback of previous effects to the usual stoned feeling. Overall, 2CP was very interesting. It reminded me of acid and mushrooms without the nausea that I usually get on those. Felt a little bit less natural and organic, but it was enjoyable. The length of time, I think, is a fairly big part in consideration for it though. I lost 24 hours of my life, and a good quarter of the time was discomfort or confusion. The combination of 2Cs and ketamine is insane, as discovered by DM Turner. This is a combination that's beyond anything I've ever experienced with the psychedelic drugs I've tried. It has so much control, so much potential, but it's incredibly draining afterwards as well. I needed some serious backbone to stay in control and not have a horrid trip. I must say that as much as I felt in control, I also felt like I hadn't got any control at times as well. I forgot between sections of the trip. Well, this is a combination that's impossible to describe, but I do recommend great caution. Great control over circumstances and surroundings is necessary for this. A 200mg 4-ACO DMT trip report, taken from the Vivec Discord. I'd found some 4-ACO DMT online, and I wanted to try it. I asked my neighbour at my university about it, and to my surprise, he had some, and gave it to me. When I weighed the whole thing, it came to a 2.00. For some reason, in my mind, I thought the entire thing was 20 milligrams, rather than 200. I consumed the whole amount, and within 15 to 20 minutes of consuming this, I could already see faces outlined on trees. I just had to remind myself to let the trip happen, as I was well aware the worst thing to do on a trip is to fight the experience, whatever it is. I was walking down this long road of trees on each side between driveways, and from walking, my vision was making me feel seasick. The movement of my head alone was causing me to feel dizzy. I still had no idea I'd consumed so much of this drug and just stopped for a second, and continued on towards this park. When I got into the park, a dog came up to me, so I reached down to stroke it. After stroking it for a few seconds, the communication me and the dog were having was incredibly vivid, and so I stopped and decided to just walk away. As I'm now leaving this park, I passed by some people who were speaking in sim character language. As I listened closely, I realised they were actually speaking English, but as I was so dissociated, to me it sounded like random gibberish. At this point, I was laughing at their silly sounding language, when I had this thought in my head that they could be talking about something very important and serious to them, and I'm laughing at it. I then realised I couldn't even tell if they had noticed me laughing or if they were talking to me or not. I decided to speed up my walk and just make my way towards this new location I wanted to get to. Walking down the road, I sat at a bus stop as I was becoming extremely exhausted by walking. I sat down and my entire vision for a split second faded into swirling patterns and colours. At this point, I realised I needed to get back home. I was outside alone and my entire vision was just morphed into nothingness. At this point, I believe my ego was already gone, but I truly had no concept to question the intensity of the experience at any point, as before I could even feel myself dying, I had already become fully invested in letting this trip play out and being stuck in it until it ends. Whilst walking back, I was looking in the distance at these very strange brown thick lines that were later out in my vision. I was trying to make out what they were, but everything else was just a normal road of cars and people. Finally, I got back into my tiny university accommodation, which was not a good idea, but I couldn't be outside in this state I was in. The time was about 5 o'clock. And I knew some friends I had would be coming at 6. Funnily enough, my other friend was spending time with his girlfriend, and for some strange reason I could just not disturb them even when this trip got quickly dangerous. I still had no intention to disturb them, and they were not even a possibility to help me in my mind. This state of delirium I have never experienced before this or since, where logically I'm going round in spirals, and you will see what I mean very soon. This is the part of the trip that I find very difficult to explain in chronological order. Some of these things seem to have happened after something I knew had happened before, and, well, that is the best way I can describe this experience. I'm not sure of the experience before Purgatory. However, I know I experienced a split second of bliss, the most amazing experience possible, before the worst experience possible. But before that, I'm going to try and order the other experiences I had in this time. They did not seem to happen at this time of the trip, however there is no other time in the trip to put them down. One experience was sharing a consciousness with another entity. This entity was almost like a godly thing, however it was not God, it was evil. My sole purpose of existing was an expense to be mocked and laughed at while I suffered. Me and this entity would communicate, however we both shared the same exact thoughts, so how we were communicating is beyond me, but we were. I was showed how my traumatic birth was the reason I was the way I was. I had to relive this birth. At the time of this, I was actually on the phone to a friend who was not anywhere near me back in Essex. I was in university about 3 hours away. He was editing a music video, and as he would go back and forth over a clip, I could hear me doing this on the phone. It would become my mum who was creating me, perfecting me, sitting in her womb, waiting to be born. I felt so impatient and just wanted to be born, but then I realised how beautiful it was to see myself be created, and the comfort of being there. Eventually, I was born, and this was very funny looking back, as I could not even put on my t-shirt. I'm not actually sure when I took it off, but I remember attempting to put it on, and every time I would move the holes around to find the head hole, I managed to also stick my head into the sleeve. I must have ruined this t-shirt. Eventually, I just threw the thing on the floor, feeling so energized and amazed to be alive, and at one point I considered leaving my room to go to the toilet. I remember opening it and putting my hands in the frame to pull my head around the corner with the insane looking grin on my face, which I then jumped back into my room, laughing at the idea of someone coming around the corridor and seeing my face. Before I knew it, I had then to experience my actual birth. I had to confront it and deal with it. This was scary. I heard the sound of a male voice, which I knew was a doctor, and beeps from a machine. This terrified me. I had to experience the traumatic birth I went through. I don't remember much of it. At some point, I was in purgatory. This was a place where time stood still, but I guess I thought of myself as someone who could somehow best the delusion of the trip. At this point, I had completely forgotten my friends were home. I remember looking at the time, and it was 8:02. I knew it. I knew I watched a 20-minute video. I knew I waited for it to end and then checked the time, that time would have to change. I also set a timer. Now, when the timer went off, I don't know, but I'm sure it went off multiple times, and I just had no idea what it was. I remembered watching the video, and when it ended, I checked the time, and it was 8:22. Needless to say, I was shocked. How could it still be 8 o'clock, I thought. I had no concept of minutes when I was checking the time, but I had the concept of minutes to know if I watched a 20-minute video, that time would have to change. This is the state of delirium I had achieved, and it went on. After doing this over and over for shorter videos, I started to really get worried I was stuck here forever. Suddenly I got visions of taking a knife and sticking it into my stomach, as this was the only way to escape the trip. Something in me knew this was wrong though. This insane pull towards surviving was deeply embedded in my subconscious. I would lay down on my bed, only to become irritable and say, fuck it. I was about to get up and do it. I would thrust myself back down into the bed as hard as possible as I thought in a loop, with my indecisive mind. Somewhere at some point, I thought maybe I should just call an ambulance as this was getting dangerous, when I suddenly remembered that my friend had been home for at least 2 hours. I called them straight away. Luckily for me, they actually knew about shrooms. I've never really discussed psychedelics with them before, and I had no idea how they'd imagine it would be, but they did know what shrooms did, so that was great. One came to my house to escort me back to theirs, while the other stayed on the phone. During this phone call, I had this thought that maybe this entire call was a hallucination, and I haven't actually answered the phone at all. I said into the phone, "X isn't coming, are they?" The voice on the phone, very sinisterly of my other friend's voice, said, "No." Slowly, I let the phone fall from my ear, as I came to terms with the fact I really had to do myself. Then, I heard my name being called from the phone. I instantly pulled it back to my ear to hear their voice asking if I was okay. "Are they coming?" I said again. The person said yes. Soon my friend came through my door and I gave him a massive hug. I then checked the time, and it was dead on 9. I was extremely happy about this, my friend probably thinking I was insane, but I didn't care. The fact I now had someone I could trust to know I was tripping, that wouldn't call an ambulance or the police, was such a massive relief. I felt so much better. Back at their flat, everything was alive, but to be honest, I didn't care. The TV started talking to me at one point, but in all honesty, I had more important things to be thinking about. A Godhead Breakthrough with 5-MeO malt, MDMA and ketamine. I listened to a Leo Gura YouTube video called 5-MeO malt, the other God molecule. 5-MeO malt is one of the tryptamines that Alexander Shulgin created. The first few times I tried the substance by itself, it was a little underwhelming, mostly because of the strong sexual energy it produces, totally distracting for deeper spiritual journeying. Although, I have to admit, when me and the wife did malt together, the sex was otherworldly, primal even. My main goal, however, when I have a day off, is to commune with God. Previously, I had attempted this with NN-DMT. This proved difficult for me at least, because it was hard to get the 3 inhalations in without coughing up a storm, while the drug turns out the lights and catapults you into hyperspace. Maybe I never made it out of the DMT waiting room to a so-called breakthrough. From what I've experienced, the otherworldly dimension seemed like a carnival. I never felt comfortable and was very intimidated by the entities I encountered. I do believe they are benevolent, but they are lacking human warmth. The 5-MeO malt taken orally hits with a warm energy in the base of the spine. It feels like a nootropic where you can think very clearly and has been praised for use in deep meditation. One day I enjoyed a 2-hour meditation with it and felt like I was done. It was a rainy day that I had all to myself and wanted a deeper experience. So I took 300 milligrams of ketamine. I really did not know that the malt was still working in my system, but I found out immediately that this was no ordinary ketamine trip. Ketamine is a wonderful substance by itself. It always comforts me in layers of colour and texture that seem to wrap me in love. It relaxes me to the core and even offers thoughtful processing of whatever psychological issues I'm working on. Synergised with the malt, I felt like I broke through the pleasant waves of colour into quantum thought responsive source code. I entered the code and could direct it to answer any question. Instead of psychedelic swirls, I was now experiencing a 4K high-definition interaction with a highly empathic divine presence. This presence read my mind and took me on a journey, answering my deepest questions about human life and the universe. And it didn't just happen that once. I was able to reliably create the experience every single time. Since both substances are taken orally, it is easy to dose and administer. You'd think I'd be happy with this result, but then I decided to add a dash of MDMA. What follows is a typical experience. 8 AM. I take 500 milligrams of lion's mane mushroom powder, magnesium L-threonate, and now brand True Focus. I don't eat, I plan to fast the whole day. I take just a swig of water because nothing ruins a ketamine trip worse than the urge to urinate. I do prepare a glass of water and electrolytes to drink later. Just as a side note, on a personal level, I think if you are taking ketamine, you do want to be drinking water the whole time because ketamine dehydrates you like mad. And also, it's a great way to flush it out of your system as well. I think most people know that ketamine affects the bladder wall quite badly. Obviously, even if you're just using it that once, you're not going to have super destructive effects just from that one little ketamine experience, but it's still better to be safe than sorry, so yeah, I just thought I'd insert that little addendum. I do prepare a glass of water and electrolytes to drink later. I enter my little studio and get the cello and nature sounds playlist going on Spotify. I've tried many types of music and for some reason this playlist just hits the right chords, and I swear activates the medicine. I highly recommend searching for this exact playlist. I plugged only 135 milligrams of MDMA mixed with saline and enjoyed the come up and peak for about 90 minutes. I do it this way because it seems to hit cleaner and last longer. Also, when taking multiple medicines, it seems to be less stress on my body to have things absorbing in different places. At 9:30, I take a 200 milligram modafinil, which is a gentle stimulant and brain enhancer, and it helps me easily remember my experience. At the same time, I mix 15 milligrams of 5-MeO malt in 1 milliliter of saline in a shot glass. Before swallowing, I swish in my mouth for 15 minutes, allowing a portion to absorb in the gums and cheeks. Now, I enjoy this come-up and synergy with the MDMA tail for about an hour. I feel peaceful and in a great state of mind. I use this time to prepare my intention for the deep entry into the source code of the universe and my entry into the Godhead. At 10:30, I take 12 squirts of 10 mg of a milliliter saline dilution of ketamine and 3 120 mg ketamine troches. I chew the troches and make a bolus of fluid in my mouth which I switch every few minutes for about half an hour, the time it takes to break through. I get comfortable in my chair, put the headphones on and pull the eye mask down. First, it's the wonderful colours or K-hole room or the gentle feeling of floating in a forest. Then, the breakthrough happens like this. And let me speculate on how it works. First, I feel my jaw vibrating. Not like the jaw clamours from too much MDMA, but a high vibration pulsing. I didn't think much about it in my first few experiences, until I realised I was using my jaw as a tuner. If you've ever taken apart an old radio, the tuner is a dial that changes the distance of resonance plates to receive a given frequency radio signal. No joke, I think the human jaw works like resonance plates to tune into the background frequency of this particular realm. My molars begin vibrating way faster than the muscles could move them, and I can only hypothesize that the signal is transmitted from my skull to the pineal gland. It is a feeling of hitting the right frequency, and then you are there. The best way to describe it is a data stream that is all around you and you are a part of. There is a weird familiarity being here, like, this is my true being, free from all my human limitations. I could see the divine language, like runes, sacred geometry, and source code fractals in all the visuals. It was pure 360-degree awareness along with pure somatic and emotional bliss. My mind could understand and process much like a supercomputer. The environment is completely thought responsive, which is why I carefully prepare my intentions beforehand. The first few times I couldn't keep my mind from wandering into sexual fantasies. Good God, however they do it in this realm is 100 times better than anything here in this human realm. But this is a distraction. There are so many more spiritual opportunities that I do not want to miss. I am a spiritual seeker, and I had a long list for today. The first was to commune with the primordial goddess Asherah, aka Inanna or Ishtar, who predates the god of the Hebrew Bible. I said out loud, Asherah. It was as if I was breathing out the logos that created the universe. It was the breath of life. In that moment, the mother goddess wrapped her arms around me and lifted me into the heavens. It was a brightness more than a sunny day, the energy of pure radiant joy all around me. Up and up, higher and higher I went. She said, "You are Christed, my anointed one, my child." She was so happy that I recognized her and called out her name. For so long, I've been forgotten, she said. She expanded with me to the size of all existence and held me in the world egg or her womb. Then, she sang the most beautiful lullaby, with sounds of sweetness and comfort that I could never, ever imagine. The sounds were the vibration of pure love. I felt so safe. I thought to myself, why is life so hard? Why do I suffer? She held me close and said, shh, just close your eyes and rest. So, I closed my eyes and lived a whole lifetime somewhere as, well, someone, and woke up in a loving embrace once again. Before I asked the question again, she said, shh, close your eyes and rest. I closed my eyes and lived a whole different lifetime, woke up in her arms again in the embrace of the Divine Mother. This time, I asked my question again, and a tear rolled down her cheek. I love all my children, and I'm sorry that you are suffering. I'm trying with all I know how to make life beautiful for all the souls in the universe, but there is a problem. Call it the primordial problem. I am the source of all, and I created you because I was lonely. I take so much joy in being you as you, and in all the stories we make, in all our incarnations, I get lost in you, dear child, and I forget who I am. I forget who I am when you are happy, and I forget who I am when you are sad. The great game is to find happiness and pleasure for as long as I can. But if you ask the right question in your quest for truth, you will find the truth. That is, you are not separate from me. No matter how hard I try, you find your way back and learn that you are an extension of me, with all my power, but also with my eternal problem. In this form of me, as Asherah or Divine Mother, I must hold all your tears and keep trying to evolve the game for you to get lost in. So, if you become happy, I can share in that. But when you find your way back to me, you see that I also have to hold your sadness, loss, grief, fear, and anger. I'm sorry I cannot shield you from suffering. I'm sorry that I was lonely. But I am not sorry I created you. You are wonderful, and you are beautiful. You can find worlds of happiness, pleasure, fun, and bliss for eons. These things are created for you to discover. Your sojourn in the human realm is difficult, but is a formative and a relatively short experience. And you don't ever have to visit me here. You can forget the truth of who I am, and the primordial problem I have contended with since time began. But I do like it when you visit me. At this point, it's 1 PM and I wake up. I drink my water with electrolytes and take notes as best I can, being somewhat groggy. I take a bathroom break and check in with the wife and tell her just how much I love her. Then, it's back to the studio for me, where I reflect for an hour or so. Just like dreaming, if you go through the experience in your mind, you will enter it into your memory. This is so important, as you do not want to have a transformative experience and forget any of the details. After reflecting, I usually go in for round 2. The 5-MO malt takes 8 hours to metabolize, and my round 2 experiences are sometimes even more heightened as the medicine metabolizes. I take 4 squirts of ketamine nasal spray and 2 120mg ketamine troches, swishing the dissolved medicine in my mouth until I reach the breakthrough, then swallow. If you've ever read about Kabbalah or Hermeticism or Kundalini or Egyptian mysticism, they all talk about ascending to the Godhead, where you draw spiritual or life force energy up from the base of the spine, through the nadis or spinal ganglia into the pineal gland. I was shown this process in exquisite detail, as in how it all worked. Essentially, it is an activation of inherent human capabilities lying dormant. It unites the physical dimension with what is known as the 5D spiritual dimension. I did not experience a full Kundalini awakening. From what I gathered, this still must be done the old-fashioned way, having reached a certain level of wisdom and meditating free from substances. But I was still shown and entered the inner sanctum, crystal palace, or holy of holies. This is a part of our soul structure that connects each individual to source. I felt like I was plugged into a nuclear furnace of sorts. The light radiated around me as if I were a sun at the centre of the solar system. At that moment, my body hummed and vibrated with the divine music that tunes and heals everything. I felt my body healing and dark blots just floated out of me. I jumped out of my chair and started speaking an Eastern European language that I knew as a personality from a past life. That personality was holding an addiction from an ancient trauma, but the source light and the healing vibration was so strong that he jumped out of my soul field, said some curses in his native language, and then left to join the spirit world. I sat back down and just bathed in the light, my whole body humming and vibrating. It was like my soul was a battery or balloon, just filling and filling. It made me realise how drained or deflated I had been energetically. I begged to stay here forever, and a voice said, "Eternity?" I replied, "Well, maybe for a very long time until I'm ready to leave." "Yes," the voice said, "you may stay here for as long as you desire." I woke up sober at about 7 PM. I checked in with my wife and told her I would spend the rest of the evening in meditation. It was the best meditation of my life with absolute clarity. I sat in stillness for 4 hours and went to bed. Although I was a little tired, I did manage well the next day in my professional capacity at work. All I could think about all day was that what if every human being could access this level of insight and healing? I believe the 5-MeO malt is a unique molecule that could activate spiritual transformation. And just for fun, I wanted to name this combination, when it's added to ketamine and MDMA, the Holy Trinity. I believe without a doubt that this experience was not hallucination or fanciful dreaming, but actual communing with the fabric of our divine reality. Namaste. A Cavern of Jewels. A Hawaiian Baby Woodrow's Salvia Divinorum and Cannabis Trip Report by MDC. Posted to EARBUDS.org September 20th, 2009. I used to trip on a very regular basis, but it had been over a year since I'd last tripped, and I wanted to trip again. I decided to start cultivating my own mushrooms for personal consumption again, but while waiting on that, ordered 2 new things I've always wanted to try but never have. I purchased 30 grams of dried Peruvian torch flesh and 10 seeds of Hawaiian Baby Woodrows. I decided to first try the Hawaiian baby woodrose the other day, and have yet to consume the Peruvian torch. I meticulously peeled the seeds and, for further measure, wet them and rubbed them off anything else that I couldn't get with a knife point or fingernails alone. I let these dry overnight and the next morning crushed them in a garlic press. I then soaked the seeds in rather small amounts of distilled water for approximately 3 hours and ran a few errands. When I returned, I put some water on the stove and prepared 2 mugs of ginger green tea, one for prior to ingestion and one to immediately follow ingestion. I'd heard a number of complaints of serious stomach upset from the seeds and hoped the ginger would help ease any discomfort. I strained any large chunks of seed out of the extract, leaving a slightly gritty but clear liquid with a colour similar to a pale golden liquor. This I mixed with a good quantity of orange juice to help mask any potentially unpleasant flavour, which it did beautifully. In about 20 to 30 minutes I began feeling lethargic and experienced a pronounced pain in the stomach, but no nausea. I decided to go lay down in bed for a while to help calm my stomach and nerves. I lay with my eyes closed for almost the entire time and drifted in and out of dreamlike visions and distinct but mild closed-eye visuals. I cannot, at this moment, remember all that I witnessed, and of course at 10 seeds it was not the most visually intricate or distinct of visual phenomena, but it was very present indeed. I do remember a vast field of nothingness with points of white and blue light that was shifting between being stars and being blocks, emanating from the centre of a non-existent cross. That is to say, there were 4 fields of these regularly spaced lights with space between each field. I remember more intricate and far less describable visual patterning, which rippled like the surface of a lake. Colours were hard to describe, and more often left simply the impression of a colour, but I seemed to have the impression of many oranges, reds, greens, and blues. A number of odd images briefly flashed in my mind's eye, but were elusive and hard to identify, let alone describe. I slipped often between the closed-eye patterns and a dreamy state, where the effects were very psychedelic, but I still also felt quite tired, and haven't any idea whether I really kept falling asleep and actually dreaming for brief periods, or if I was simply having particularly strong visions. It wasn't like normal dreams I have, but neither was it anything at all like the normal visuals I've experienced of psychedelics before. The previous visions and experiences made up about the first 2 hours of the experience, which really surprised and excited me. Upon rising from this trance-like state, I felt no nausea but a continued pain in the gut, which didn't leave until the effects diminished entirely. While I didn't feel sick, I knew I must purge and went to the bathroom to do so and felt quite better afterwards. I was feeling exhilarated now, and the effects were still strong and reminded me very much of the feeling of mushrooms at acid, but I was to find the 2-hour come-up was to include the most intense effects I would receive from the seeds alone. I knew I had a long way to go and was unsure if the effects would keep increasing or taper away very, very slowly. I was aware I'd experienced a peak very early on, and decided to wait and find out. So I went to my living room, smoked a bong, and drank some water while watching Labyrinth. After the movie I realised the marijuana made the experience more pleasant, but I had reached the highest level of intensity there would be and passed it for good. It had been quite a while since tripping, but I had some 10x Salvia divinorum extract left from a long while ago. My original experiences with Salvia were very positive and spiritual, but later on I began having only quite frightening trips which were hard to handle and caused me to go on a long time without using it. I suspected that being in an entirely fairly psychedelic state, it may be easier for me to take the transition into the other reality of Salvia and decide to test this hypothesis. I settled into bed, prepared a very small test kit, just to give me a reminder of what a heavier experience would be like, to help me decide whether I really wanted to proceed with this. Upon smoking this tiny hit, I closed my eyes and noticed a definite but mild shift in consciousness to begin with, followed by very fluid and flowing visual patterning. I got some very real effects and handled the experience beautifully, and really enjoyed the lovely imagery and unusual mindset of the Salvia experience, mild though it was. As I returned to mostly normal reality, I decided in fact wished to proceed into a much more profound excursion, but still did not wish to overdo things. I put in a hit about twice as big as the previous one, but still a small hit. Upon smoking this and again closing my eyes, the visual patterning returned quite strongly and became a whirling tornado of patterns and colour. I began to lose any and all knowledge of my body and my life outside of this other dimension. My existence right now was purely spiritual and mental, a point of awareness and being with no name or face, but which surely could still see. The patterning wrapped itself around me, circling, and then split into an upper and lower portion, each spinning another way. The patterns quickly gave way to the more otherworldly space as I broke through and came into a physically different place altogether. I had the sense of rising, but rising through the earth into a cavern deep within the earth. This cavern was full of colours and intricate designs, and was inhabited by some sort of object containing an entity or entities. A multifaceted object with a machine-like exoskeleton, but with facets like shining jewels. Each facet seemed to be a face or eye, but it was unclear if every one was different or all the same entity. It spoke to me as one, welcoming me and calling me by name, reminding me who I was. Oddly, I was the one communicating telepathically, repeatedly stating that I'd returned. I take this to be a statement of humility and accomplishment simultaneously, as well as one of reverence. I feel as though the past few heavy trips had taken me to a hellish realm which was a form of punishment for misusing the substance, whereas initially I received wonderful visions of deities and witnessed spontaneous healing of a loved one, and was privy to what goes on behind the scenes. My statement and feeling of having returned was quite significant, I must say, implying not only that I'd returned, but that I'd learned from mistakes and wished to approach carefully and humbly now, and wished to learn what can be taught. As is usually the case with significant salvia trips, right as I was becoming reoriented in my new environment, I was pushed back down into normal reality, back into my head. My eyes snapped open, and I could see my room, but could not figure out yet who or where I was, and it took several minutes of lying there to reorient myself with ordinary reality. At first, I even felt as though I may have gone back to the wrong place, into someone else's head. In fact, I felt like my head was in the right place, but felt as if my body is being directly beneath my head standing upright, not in front of my head laying down as I could see this person doing. I felt my hand on my chest, but didn't know for sure if I was alone or not. Was it my hand, or even my chest? Could I be sure they were both mine? I could still sense the presence of the entity to the left of me, but could see nothing out of the ordinary. As I finally came to grips with everything, I looked at a clock. The 2 salvia trips had taken about 25 to 30 minutes. I kept waiting to come down completely from the salvia until I remembered that I had taken the Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds and would not return to baseline for probably another 4 hours at least. I spent a while just sitting outdoors on my balcony reflecting on the salvia trips and drinking water. I soon made some food for myself as it was the middle of the afternoon and I'd yet to even eat. After a while of just being still and quiet, I went back indoors and decided to watch some TV for a while and smoke some more bong hits. The very last effects were diminishing around 9.5 hours in, and I enjoyed a small drink of gin and a homebrew now that my stomach was feeling better. Sleep came easily later that night as well, and I felt well rested the next day. All in all, I'm actually quite surprised with the experience. I'm particularly surprised at the intensity of the trip during the come-up and the trance-like state I experienced initially. As mild as the rest of the trip was, and salvia, I was shocked at the effects I received initially. I was quite pleased with the effects of the HPWR, and noted remarkable mental clarity throughout the experience. I will definitely try these seeds again, both by themselves in a higher dose, and in the same dose in addition to some cubensis mushrooms. The Pusher of Universes, a Hawaiian Baby Woodrose and Salvia Divinorum Trip Report by Psych Rick, posted at EARBUDS.org January 14, 2014. About 2 or more years ago, I started getting very interested in entheogens and medicinal botanicals. I've already vastly entered the realms of psychedelia and drugs. More recently though, I found a new respect for drugs and life in general. My experience with entheogens such as mushrooms, LSD, salvia, MDMA, LSA and hash have been crucial to my growth in spirituality and altered states. Other drugs I've experimented with but now avoid are pharmaceuticals like Xanax, Adderall, Valium, Oxycontin, etc., as well as alcohol, heroin, DXM or Robo. I found that treating the substance respectfully by creating experience with a well-planned set and setting is the best way to experience any drug, but mostly in my case entheogens and psychedelics. Which is what leads me to my latest experiment, with the Hawaiian Baby Woodrose seed and smoking salvia extract in the peak of my Hawaiian Baby Woodrose trip. Preparation. I grinded 10 seeds in a coffee grinder, then mixed them with some applesauce and enjoyed them. Onset. Within 45 minutes, I noticed a pleasant tingling or light buzzing in my legs and head. I got a little cold in my house, so I decided to go on a walk for a bit. When I was walking, I felt a little bit cramping or pain in my stomach area emerge, so then sparked up my cannabis joint, which immediately calmed any discomfort. After the joint and a half-a-mile walk, I started feeling alert and felt this pressure around my eyes. It wasn't unpleasant at all, but something that reminds me of when I do LSD. Energy bursts were creeping up at me anywhere from my inner thighs to my feet and head and body, so I decided to stroll on back home. Once I walked inside and took my shoes off, I quickly noticed an amazing amount of euphoria and bliss enter my consciousness, much like a wave of LSD but with no visuals. At this point, I sat relaxed on my couch and turned up some psychedelic music. Being a musician myself, I suddenly realised how amazing and deep the music sounded. I laid back and let the music and energy waves coexist in my sensory field. Closing my eyes, I saw green tunnels moving fast and eventually stopping at this huge neon green ball of light that was so vivid I knew it was a closed-eye visual. After about another hour and a half of exploring my closed-eye visuals, which were nowhere near mushrooms or LSD, but nonetheless very pleasant with the aid of music, I decided to take it up a few notches. I packed a nice-sized hit of Salvia 10X in my glass pipe, dimmed the lights, and began meditating, for I was not a beginner of the sacred herb and knew very well what Sally could do to a man. I then go on to acknowledge the power of Salvia Divinorum and asked her to give me an insightful and not too intense experience since I was already tripping. I wanted to break through to the Salvia dimensions, but I did not want to experience any turbulence along the way. With that said, I hit the pipe without letting the lighter stop burning the herb and took a huge hit, holding it in for over 30 seconds. By the time I blew out the hit, I saw my visual plane almost crack in time, and within 10 seconds I felt like I was being pushed really fast and squished next to other bodies of flesh. I was being pulled deep into the Salvia world, with no idea what I was getting myself into. Finally, after what seemed 10 minutes, I felt as if the force pushing me relaxed, and I was able to vividly witness one huge archetypal image of multiple universes, including ours being organised and controlled by this pusher. My emotions were shocked with this feeling of being infused with this pusher that pulled me out of my dimension. It was as if time was truly no more, and had no thought of the normal plane we all experience on an everyday basis. My sole purpose right now was to move universes and spirits in correct alignment with me. Remember, I fused with the pusher archetype that pulled me into this realm. A vision of my infused form with this pusher entity was seen in an out-of-body experience-like view. It's hard to explain what its appearance really was, but I could most closely relate it to a caterpillar in a train and colourful images on its body in spirals around its aura. The vision lasted for a while, but slowly and surely was fading away, and slowly but surely I realised I was looking at my living room. I was cracking up when I realised I just came back from the Salvia trip because I actually forgot I was a human. I was like, nah, no way. I actually forgot. After laying down and feeling the huge euphoric infusions of the afterglow of salvia and the LSA from the seeds, the salvia come down intensified my LSA effects for 2 hours, and I was literally getting these amazing visuals that felt cartoon-like, some breathing or moving and dancing qualities on surfaces. I noticed very bright lights and almost tracer-like images from lights in any form. The euphoria from the seeds was still waving in and out, and slowly the salvia afterglow was gone. I smoked another joint and realised after the salvia experience fully subsided that I was actually quite stimulated. I decided to take myself on a bike ride, and then went home and talked on the phone to close friends enthusiastically. A lot of research I've done for Hawaiian baby woodrows says that they are sedating for most people compared to the stimulating effects of LSD. I personally felt almost the same effects from LSD except the visuals and the intense spiritual talkative mindset. Overall, I must say that Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds were not that nauseating as I thought they'd be, but they were actually quite stimulating with a marked euphoria, energy burst, entactogenic qualities, very few open-eye visuals, more chance of simple fantasy or imaginative closed-eye visuals, and any discomfort from cramps were neutralised from cannabis. The euphoric mindset was perfect for inducing me into the salvia trance, but I strongly suggest you be careful because I noticed the salvia trip seemed to last a lot longer when I was on Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds compared to just stoned or baseline. I also recall feeling like I was in the experience a lot longer. Seemed a lifetime before my return to home base. So if you don't want to have a very long, in-depth salvia experience that can be quite intense, then do not do Hawaiian Baby Woodrose seeds first. But overall for me, it was the most unique and theogenic experience that I've had to date. The highest of highs. A Hawaiian Baby Woodrose and Salvia divinorum trip report by Cameron, posted to earwood.org December 5th, 2011. I have little experience with tripping on salvia, and no experience with tripping on LSD. I developed a bit of control with my salvia trips, so I thought I would take the leap of tripping for a great deal of time on a more powerful psychoactive drug. I crushed 10 seeds of HBWR and chewed them for about 2 minutes about 6:30 PM. Soon after, the first hour of my experience, I felt a warming sensation in my head. It was distinct enough to tell that this was not just wishful thinking, but that the seeds were doing something. During the course of that hour, every so often I would feel a flash of what seemed like insanity for less than half of a second. From what I'd heard about LSD experiences and the fact that LSA was very similar, I was expecting to have a very colourful and unique trip, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. After a half hour or so of this warming sensation and these brief glimpses of insanity, I thought I could help the LSA trip begin by using salvia. I sat at my desk and inhaled 2 very deep breaths of salvia, holding both breaths inside my lungs as long as I possibly could. In a matter of seconds, I was in a new mindset. I was still in my room, the TV was still on the same program, and for the most part everything in my room was how it should be, but the only exception was that I felt the presence of many beings in the room with me. I didn't question their lack of body and voice, but rather I just knew they were there. These beings have appeared in other salvia trips I've had. I often speak to them, and when I'm having a bad trip, I yell. When I'm having a bad trip, I tell the beings that I'm not going to give in and panic, because panicking is really what they want. After I regained my normal state of mind, the warming sensation was gone, and I began to feel a bit of nausea. I called my friend with whom I've previously used salvia and told him of these effects I was feeling. They were mild and I didn't have much to say. Still seemed intrigued though, because I'd mentioned the seed's capabilities in the past. So, concluding the conversation, he told me to call him if I felt anything more going forward. After about an hour or more of intense nausea, I started to experience a feeling of well-being. At first I assumed I was only feeling good because the nausea was subsiding, but I didn't want to lead myself on thinking that the seeds were beginning to take effect. After about 20 minutes of this feeling intensifying, I concluded that this was indeed effects from the seeds. This intense feeling lasted from about 9 PM until 3 AM. At the time I remember thinking to myself, euphoria, euphoria, euphoria. Although there were no visual hallucinations during this trip, my hearing became incredibly perceptive instead. There were 3 sounds in my room at the time: the TV, the ceiling fan, and the fan inside my laptop. I could hear each sound individually and incredibly accurately. Every so often the very subtly volumed fan inside my laptop would stop running, and I would immediately take notice of it. The absence of this sound would make me feel completely different. My body seemed to keep releasing chemicals that heightened my mood, yet I felt 100% different. At about 1 AM, I really wanted to just go to sleep. My body felt completely drained of energy and my eyelids were very, very heavy. I went to the bathroom before I attempted to go to sleep like I always do. My mind was completely clear at the time, but I walked and moved as if I were drunk. Stumbling along the way, I made it to the bathroom. I looked into the mirror and my everlasting smile grew dramatically. The green rings in my eyes were a very thin hairline, while the rest was clouded by a deep black pupil. I laid my head down to rest, but realised that sleep was far from possible in spite of my incredible fatigue. My mind was just racing. I couldn't control the presence of song, nor could I subdue the tapping of my fingers to the beat. I began to grow frustrated with my active mind. I grew increasingly worried that these euphoric feelings would never cease, while at the same time I was still completely consumed in the happiness. At about 2 AM, the effects began to diminish, and I fell asleep a little after 3 AM. I was utterly exhausted, yet I laid in darkness for over 2 hours before falling asleep. My trip was characterised solely by intense euphoria. Over the course of the 6 hours, I thought about many things that would normally upset me, but my mood could not be altered. The smile on my face could not be wiped away whatsoever. I tried many times to hold a straight face, but I could not succeed for more than 10 seconds at a time. I've had many good days throughout my lifetime, but no moment could compare to what I felt every second of this trip. This was a kind of happiness that could not be achieved with chemical induction. One would think such an incredible experience would yield a hefty price, yet I felt no come down of any kind the following day. The only price I paid was about $20 for 50 Hawaiian baby woodrose seeds. Although I felt no visual hallucinations whatsoever like I'd actually expected, I do fully intend to repeat this experiment.